The show
People
is
talk or say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front door.
Who says you weren't?
Them.
Who?
Them.
It was terrible out there. I could hear breathing.
We told you.
Are you worried about the man?
They hate us. That's the truth. They want to kill and torture every one of us. You can see it in their eyes.
Come now, Frederick. Do you dream about unholy things?
I really don't like what's going on here. There's something wrong, and that's a fact.
Wait. What did you dream last night? This manifestation of evil. You must be delivered from evil.
Hi, I'm Shella Farrow. Come and see White Devils at the Gardena Cinema.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Robservations with Robert Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your sisterless brother, and your evangelist of the imagination and the existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm robcasting you from right here in the Robservatory. Or robcasting you? Is that like rocking you? It's robcasting at you. To you, the members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 1067. I don't know why right when I play the White Devils trailer, the connection goes skewy. But I interviewed Shella Farrow, the star of White Devils, today, and you could see in that brief clip, she's an incredibly beautiful woman, incredibly intelligent. She will be at the screening this Tuesday at the Gardena Cinema in Gardena, California. You can get tickets to the White Devils. The premiere's open to everybody. We're going to have a Q&A afterwards with some of the cast and crew. And it is the first time that this movie is shown publicly, which is very exciting. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Max Allan Collins, the writer of course, True Noir, but he got his first notice of his book, The Return of the Maltese Falcon, in Publishers Weekly. Now, for those of you who don't know, you must know the movie The Maltese Falcon. If you don't, I don't care to know you. So go watch it and then come back and then we can be friends again. But The Maltese Falcon, about the great fictional detective Sam Spade, is Max Allan Collins' favorite novel. So he was clocking this for years and years to find out, when did this novel go into the public domain? Well, the answer to that question is January 2026. So Max, having the foresight that he had, he didn't have to look for the rights. He actually wrote a sequel to The Maltese Falcon in the style kind of Dashiell Hammett and all that. And you can see it. It's coming out in, of course, January 2026. Very exciting. I love it when the good guys win. I love it when a plan comes together. So, this episode is kind of themed all around books. We're going to talk about books and literacy and culture. And I'm going to bring on Alvaro. My friend Alvaro is going to talk a little bit later. I even am going to maybe read an article he wrote for Substack, which is weird to read an article from the guest that's going to be on, but I've already done that once. But it's a long article. Maybe I don't have to read it, but it's on his Substack, and it's about why he loves the Scream franchise. So you'll see the Substack will be just below him, his link to his Substack. It's actually, I'd never really gone to his Substack until he sent me this article. There's lots of interesting stuff on his Substack. I should have been rating his Substack for ideas for this show. I guess I can do that now that I know him, but I can just bring him on. So it'd be weird if I just mined his Substack for subjects when I can just bring him on like I'm going to do later. But the reason I wanted to talk about the post-literate society is I found a pretty interesting article that was written last month. But I was actually watching a YouTube stream with Lionel Shriver. She's the novelist who wrote the book about, like, We Have to Talk About Kevin, and there's a new movie coming out with J-Law and Robert Pattinson based on a novel that she wrote. And she said a lot of really compelling things. I was like, wow, this is very interesting. And one of the things that she said that I thought was fascinating is she said one of the problems around public discourse is we are no longer able to speak to one another because the very basic things that we all used to believe, like, for instance, she brought up the example of where Canada is. And she was saying that 40% of Americans apparently, and I don't know if this is true, cannot show you where Canada is on a map. And to me, these are, basic geography. You learn basic geography in elementary school. You had to learn the countries, the capitals. You had to learn the world. And it's wild to me. It's very apparent to me lately that people don't know what I learned in elementary school. Like, if you ask people to find Israel on a map, they don't know exactly where it is. They don't even know that part of the world. They can't tell you where Europe begins and ends and where the Middle East begins. And if you can't do that, how are we supposed to talk to one another? How are we supposed to reach consensus? And that was one of the things that she was bringing up. She's like, we're in the middle of culture wars. Like, for instance, she was talking about immigration in Europe. How can you expect people to immigrate to your country if they don't know anything about your country? They don't know about your beliefs. They don't know about your customs. So when immigrants come into the country and they don't know anything about your country, you can't expect them to suddenly become you. What they're doing is bringing their country into your country. And so that's not good for the country that's hosting a wave of immigration. And there's a lot of problems that arise. But because we're nice people, we want to help. And yet sometimes, pragmatically, maybe that's not the best course of action. Really fascinating. I wish I had thought about bringing the link on, but I didn't. But I found an article that reminded me of this talk. So I'm going to read it. It's kind of a long article, but I think it's a good article. And it's also on Substack. And I think they republished it on the Free Press. And it's by James Marriott. And it was published September 18th, 2025. And it's called The Dawn of the Post-Literate Society and the End of Civilization. Really cheery, I know. What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book because there would be no one who wanted to read one. That comes to us from Neil Postman from the book Amusing Ourselves to Death, which, by the way, is essential reading if you've not read it. It was one of the most important revolutions in modern history, and yet no blood was spilled, no bombs were thrown, and no monarch was beheaded. Perhaps no great social transformation has ever been carried out so quietly. This one took place in armchairs, in libraries, in coffee houses, and in clubs. What happened was this. In the middle of the 18th century, huge numbers of ordinary people began to read. For the first couple of centuries after the invention of the printing press, reading remained largely an elite pursuit. But by the beginning of the 1700s, the expansion of education and an explosion of cheap books began to diffuse reading rapidly down through the middle classes and even into the lower ranks of society. People alive at the time understood that something momentous was going on. Suddenly it seemed that everyone was reading everywhere. Men, women, children, the rich, the poor. Reading began to be described as a fever, an epidemic, a craze, and a madness. As the historian Tim Blanning writes, conservatives were appalled and progressives were delighted that it was a habit that knew no social boundaries. This transformation is sometimes known as the Reading Revolution. It was an unprecedented democratization of information, the greatest transfer of knowledge into the hands of ordinary men and women in history. In Britain, Only 6,000 books were published in the first decade of the 18th century. In the last decade of the same century, the number of new titles was in excess of 56,000. More than 500,000 new publications appeared in German over the course of the 1700s. The historian Simon Schama has gone so far as to write that literacy rates in the 18th century France were much higher than in the late 20th century United States. Where readers had once read intensively, spending their lives reading and rereading 2 or 3 books, the reading revolution popularized a new kind of extensive reading. People read everything they could get their hands on: newspapers, journals, history, philosophy, science, theology, and literature. Books, pamphlets, and periodicals poured off the presses. It was an age of monumental works of thought and knowledge. The encyclopedia, Samuel Johnson's Dictionary of the English Language, Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Radical new ideas about God, about history, about society, about politics, and even the whole purpose and meaning of life flooded through Europe. Even more importantly, and this is what I like the most, print changed how people thought. The world of print is orderly, logical, and rational. In books, knowledge is classified, comprehended, connected, and put in its place. Books make arguments, propose theses, develop ideas. To engage with the written word, the media theorist Neil Postman wrote, means to follow a line of thought, which requires considerable powers of classifying, inference-making, and reasoning. As Postman pointed out, it is no accident that the growth of print culture in the 18th century was associated with the growing prestige of reason, hostility to superstition, the birth of capitalism, and the rapid development of science. Other historians have linked the 18th century explosion of literacy to the Enlightenment, the birth of human rights, the arrival of democracy, and even the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. The world as we know it was forged in the reading revolution. Now, we are living through the counter-revolution. More than 300 years after the reading revolution ushered in a new era of human knowledge, books are dying. Numerous studies show that reading is in free fall. Even the most pessimistic 20th century critics of the screen age would have struggled to predict the scale of the present crisis. In America, reading for pleasure has fallen by 40% in the last 20 years. In the UK, more than a third of adults say they have given up reading. The National Literacy Trust reports shocking and dispiriting falls in children's reading, which is now at its lowest level on record. The publishing industry is in crisis. As the author Alexander Larman writes, books that once would have sold in the tens, even hundreds of thousands, are now lucky to sell in the mid-4 figures. Here is a chart. The decline of reading, the percentage of U.S. teenagers who read in their leisure time. It's really shocking how it went up from 2000 to now. Hardly ever. Most remarkably, in late 2024, the OECD, I don't know what that is, published a report which found that literacy levels were declining or stagnating in most developed countries. Once upon a time, a social scientist confronted with statistics like these might have guessed the cause was a societal crisis, like a war or the collapse of the education system. What happened was the smartphone, which was widely adopted in developed countries in the mid-2010s. Those years will be remembered as a watershed in human history. Never before has there been a technology like the smartphone. Where previous entertainment technologies like cinema or television were intended to capture their audience's attention for a period, the smartphone demands your entire life. Phones are designed to be hyper-addictive, hooking users on a diet of pointless notifications, innate short-form videos, and social media rage bait. The average person now spends 7 hours a day staring at a screen. For Gen Z, the figure is 9 hours. A recent article in the Times found that on average, Modern students are destined to spend 25 years of their waking lives scrolling on a screen. If the reading revolution represented the greatest transfer of knowledge to ordinary men and women in history, the screen revolution represents the greatest theft of knowledge from ordinary people in history. Our universities are at the front line of this crisis, if I might editorialize, Palestinian protesters being a perfect example. They are now teaching their first truly post-literate cohorts of students who have grown up almost entirely in the world of short-form video, computer games, addictive algorithms, and increasingly AI. Because ubiquitous mobile internet has destroyed these students' attention spans and restricted the growth of their vocabularies, the rich and detailed knowledge stored in books is becoming inaccessible to many of them. A study of English literature students at American universities found that they were unable to understand the first paragraph of Charles Dickens' novel Bleak House, a book that was regularly read by children. An article published in The Atlantic, I read this on this show, the elite college students who can't read books, cites the characteristic experience of one professor. 20 years ago, Dame's classes had no problem engaging in sophisticated discussions of Pride and Prejudice one week and Crime and Punishment the next. Now his students tell him up front that the reading load feels impossible. It's not just the frenetic pace. They struggle to attend to small details while keeping track of the overall plot. Reading is a skill that needs to be practiced and learned, because the basis of all thought and knowledge in our modern age comes from reading. And if people can't read, our modern age, I'm editorializing here, will come to an end. And we're seeing it now all over the world. Most of our students, according to another despairing assessment, are functionally illiterate. This chimes with everything I've heard in my own conversations with teachers and academics. One Oxbridge lecturer I spoke to described a collapse in literacy among his students. The transmission of knowledge, the most ancient function of the university, is breaking down in front of our eyes. Writers like Shakespeare, Milton, and Jane Austen, whose works have been handed on for centuries, can no longer reach the next generation of readers. They are losing the ability to understand them. The tradition of learning is like a precious golden thread of knowledge running through human history, linking reader to reader through time. It last snapped during the collapse of the Western Roman Empire as the barbarian tides beat against the frontier. Cities shrank and libraries burned or decayed. As the world of Rome's educated elite fell apart, many writers and works of literature passed out of human memory, either to be lost forever or to be rediscovered hundreds of years later in the Renaissance. That golden thread is breaking for the second time. The collapse of reading is driving declines in various measures of cognitive ability. Reading is associated with a number of cognitive benefits, including improved memory and attention span, better analytical thinking, improved verbal fluency, and lower rates of cognitive decline later in life. After the introduction of the smartphone in the mid-2010s, global PISA scores, the most famous international measure of student ability, began to decline. As John Byrne Murdoch writes in the Financial Times, students increasingly tell surveys that they struggle to think, learn, and concentrate. You will notice the telltale mid-2010s inflection point. The Monitoring the Future study has been asking, the Monitoring the Future study has been asking 18-year-olds whether they have difficulty thinking, concentrating, or learning new things. And look at these test scores in decline. The share of final year high school students who report difficulties was stable throughout the 1990s and 2000s, but began a rapid upward climb in the mid-2010s. That is not great. And as Byrne Murdoch says, these cognitive issues are not restricted to schools and universities. They affect everyone. The decline in measures of reasoning and problem solving is not confined to teenagers. Adults show a similar pattern, with declines visible across all age groups. Look at this. Performance in reasoning and problem-solving tests is declining. Average scores on assessments across different domains in high-income countries, teen and adult scores use different scales. Very scary. Most intriguing and alarming is the case of IQ, which rose consistently throughout the 20th century, the so-called Flynn effect, but which now seems to have begun to fall. The result is not only the loss of information and intelligence, but a tragic impoverishing of the human experience. For centuries, almost all educated and intelligent people have believed that literature and learning are among the highest purposes and deepest consolations of human existence. The classics have been preserved over the centuries because they contain, in Matthew Arnold's famous phrase, the best that has been thought and said. The greatest novels and poems enrich our sense of the human experience by imaginatively putting us inside other minds and taking us to other times and other places. By reading nonfiction, science, history, philosophy, travel writing, we become deeply acquainted with our place in the extraordinary and complicated world we are privileged to inhabit. Smartphones are robbing us of these consolations. The epidemic of anxiety, depression, and purposelessness affecting young people in the 21st century is often linked to the isolation and negative social comparison fostered by smartphones. It's also a direct product of the pointlessness, fragmentation, and triviality of the culture of the screen, which is wholly unequipped to speak to the deep human needs for curiosity, narrative, deep attention, and artistic fulfillment. This draining away of culture, critical thinking, and intelligence represents a tragic loss of human potential and human flourishing. It is also one of the major challenges facing modern societies. Our vast, interconnected, tolerant, and technologically advanced civilization is founded on the complex, rational kinds of thinking fostered by literacy. As Walter Ong writes in the book Orality and Literacy, certain kinds of complex and logical thinking simply cannot be achieved without reading and writing. It is virtually impossible to develop a detailed and logical argument in spontaneous speech. You would get lost, lose your thread, contradict yourself, and confuse your audience trying to rephrase ineptly expressed points, as I experience every day on Twitter, or X. As an extreme example, think of somebody trying to simply speak a famous work of philosophy, say Kant's 900-page The Critique of Pure Reason, or Ludwig Wittgenstein's Tractus, or Sartre's Being and Nothingness. It would be impossible to do so, and also impossible to listen to. To produce his great work, Kant had to write down his ideas, scratch them out, think about them, refine them, and then rework them over many years so they added up into a persuasive and logical whole. To properly understand the book, you have to be able to have it in front of you, so you can reread bits you don't understand, check logical connections, and meditate on important passages until you really take them in. This kind of advanced thinking is inseparable from reading and writing. The classicist Eric Havelock argued that the arrival of literacy in ancient Greece was the catalyst for the birth of philosophy. Once people had a means of pinning ideas down on the page to interrogate them, refine them, and build on them, a whole new revolutionary way of analytic and abstract thinking was born, one that would go on to shape our entire civilization. With the birth of writing, received ways of thinking could be challenged and improved. This was our species' cognitive liberation. As Neil Postman puts it in Amusing Ourselves to Death, philosophy cannot exist without criticism. Writing makes it possible and convenient to subject thought to a continuous and concentrated scrutiny. Writing freezes speech, and in doing so gives birth to the grammarian, the logician, the rhetorician, the historian, the scientist, all the Rhetorician, the word, thank you, Alvaro, the rhetorician, the scientist, all those who must hold language before them so they can see what it means, where it errs, and where it's leading. Not only philosophy, but the entire intellectual infrastructure of modern civilization depends on the kinds of complex thinking inseparable from reading and writing. Serious historical writing, scientific theorems, detailed policy proposals, and the kinds of rigorous and dispassionate political debate conducted in books and magazines. These forms of advanced thought provide the intellectual underpinnings of modernity. If our world feels unstable at the moment, like the ground is shifting beneath us, it is because those underpinnings are falling to pieces underneath our feet. As you probably noticed, the world of the screen is going to be a much choppier place than the world of print, more emotional, more angry, more chaotic. Walter Ong emphasized the writing cools and rationalysis thought. If you want to make your case in person or in a TikTok video, you have innumerable means for bypassing logical argument. You can shout and weep and charm your audience into submission. You can play emotive music or show harrowing images. Such appeals are not rational, but human beings are not perfectly rational animals and are inclined to be persuaded by them. A book can't yell at you, thank God, and it can't cry. Without the array of logic-defeating appeals available to podcasters and YouTubers, authors are much more reliant on reason alone, condemned to painfully piece their arguments together, sentence by sentence. I feel that agony now. Books are far from perfect, but they are much more closely bound to the imperatives of logical argument than any other means of human communication ever devised. This is why Ong observed that pre-literate oral societies often strike visitors from literate countries as remarkably mystical, emotional, and antagonistic in their discourse and thinking. And here's somebody we all love. As books die, we seem to be returning to those oral habits of thought. Our discourse is collapsing into panic, hatred, and tribal warfare. Anti-scientific thought thrives at the highest level of American government. Promoters of irrationality and conspiracy theories, such as Candace Owens and Russell Brand, find vast and credulous audiences online. Laid out on the pages of their arguments would seem absurd. On the screen, they are persuasive to many people. The rise of these emotional and irrational styles of thinking poses a profound challenge to our culture and politics. We may be about to find out that it is not possible to run the most advanced civilization in the history of the planet with the intellectual apparatus of a pre-literate society. The age of print was characterized by unprecedented dynamism and cultural richness. Reading is a foundation stone of the creativity and innovation that is fundamental to modernity. It is not the case that for a society to benefit the culture of print, that every citizen must be a bookworm. And yet if one habit unites the leaders, inventors, scientists, and artists who have forged our civilization, it is reading. Serious readers are overrepresented in almost every area of human achievement. Take great politicians. Teddy Roosevelt claimed to read a book a day. Winston Churchill set himself an ambitious program of reading in philosophy, economics, and history as a young man and continued to read voraciously throughout his life. Clement Attlee recalled that he read 4 books a week as a schoolboy. Look, it's the man who fell to earth. Or consider popular culture, not usually thought of as a particularly literary field of human endeavor. David Bowie read, in his own words, voraciously. I actually have a book that my friend Clark gave me of David Bowie's his reading list. Every book I ever bought, I have. I can't throw it away, he once said. It's physically impossible to leave my hand. A list Bowie wrote of his 100 favorite books includes works by William Faulkner, Tom Stoppard, D.H. Lawrence, and T.S. Eliot, and you can buy that book. In a recent book about his songwriting career, Paul McCartney cited Dylan Thomas, Oscar Wilde, and Allen Ginsberg, of French symbolist writer Alfred Jarry, Eugene O'Neill, and Heinrich Ibsen, among the authors who had inspired him. Thomas Edison read deeply throughout his life. So did Charles Darwin. So did Albert Einstein. Ironically, even Elon Musk claims that he was raised by books. Reading enriches creative work by giving men and women of genius access to the vast and priceless trove of knowledge preserved in books. The best that has been thought and said. The discipline of reading equips them with the analytical tools to interrogate, refine, and revolutionize that tradition. As Elizabeth Eisenstein argues in the printing revolution in early modern Europe, the invention of the printing press helped to catalyze a series of cultural revolutions which forged the modern world: the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Scientific Revolution. Other historians would add the Enlightenment, the birth of human rights, and the Industrial Revolution. Eisenstein explains how the tendency of reading to foster innovation played out in Renaissance universities. With the invention of printing, students had increased access to books, allowing bright undergraduates to reach beyond their teachers' grasp. Gifted students no longer needed to sit at the feet of a given master in order to learn a language or an academic skill. And so, students who took advantage of technical texts which served as silent instructors were less likely to defer to traditional authority and more receptive to innovating trends. Young minds provided with updated editions, especially of mathematical texts, began to surpass not only their own elders, but the wisdom of ancients as well. These students are just one symptom of the stagnant culture of the screen age, which is characterized by simplicity, repetitiveness, and shallowness. Its symptoms are observable all around us. Pop songs in every genre are becoming shorter, simpler, and more repetitive, and films are being reduced to endlessly repeated franchise formulas. Studies suggest that the number of disruptive and transformative inventions is declining. More money is spent on scientific research than ever in history, but the rate of progress is barely keeping pace with the past. Doubtless, many factors are at work, but this is also precisely what you would expect of a generation of researchers who spent their childhoods glued to screens rather than reading or thinking. Even books themselves are becoming less complex, unless you read Equimedian by my guest, who you'll meet just a little bit. If the literate world was characterized by complexity and innovation, the post-literate world is characterized by simplicity, ignorance, and stagnation. It is probably not an accident that the decline of literacy has ushered in an obsession with cultural nostalgia, a desire to endlessly recycle the cultural forms of the past. The television shows and styles of the 90s, for instance, or the fashions of the early 2000s. Our culture is being transformed into a smartphone wasteland. Cut off from the cultural riches of the past, we are condemned to live in a narcissistic, eternal present. Deprived of the critical tools to question and develop the insights of those who went before us, we are condemned to endlessly repeat and pastiche ourselves, superhero film by superhero film, repetitive pop songs by repetitive pop song. Most of all, this increasingly trivial and mindless culture is a calamity for our politics. Amusingly, from the perspective of the present, the reading revolution of the 18th century was accompanied not only by excitement, but by a moral panic. No lover of tobacco or coffee, no wine drinker or lover of games can be as addicted to their pipe, bottle, games, or coffee table as those many hungry readers are to their reading habit, thundered one German clergyman. Richard Steele feared that novels raise expectations which the ordinary course of life can never realize. Others fretted that reading, quote, excites the imagination too much and fatigues the heart. It is easy to laugh at these anxieties. We've spent our whole lives hearing how virtuous and sensible it is to read books. How could reading be dangerous? But in hindsight, these conservative moralists were right to worry. The rapid expansion of literacy helped to destroy the orderly, hierarchical, and profoundly socially unequal world they cherished. The reading revolution was a catastrophe for the ultra-privileged and exploitive aristocrats of the European aristocratic ancient regime. The old autocratic system of government with almighty kings at the top, lords and clergy underneath, and peasants squirming at the very bottom. Ignorance was a foundation stone of feudal Europe. The vast inequalities of the aristocratic order were partially able to be sustained because the population had no way to find out about the scale of the corruption, abuses, and inefficiencies of their governments. And the old feudal hierarchy was justified not so much by logical argument as by what Walter Ong might have recognized as a very pre-literate appeal to mystical and emotional thinking. Gosh, mystical and emotional thinking. I wonder where we have that coming from these days. I wonder. Maybe you should too. This was what historians of the 17th century know as the representational power of culture, the highly visual system of monarchical, I can't get these multi-words, monarchical propaganda which forced the fearsome and awe-inspiring image of the king onto his subjects. The regime displayed its power in parades, paintings, firework displays, statues, and grandiose buildings, and AI-generated videos on social media. The system worked in an age before mass literacy, but as knowledge spread through society and the analytic, critical modes of thinking fostered by print took hold, the whole mental and cultural atmosphere which sustained the old order was burned away. People began to know too much and to think too much. The feudal order seems to be fundamentally incompatible with literacy. The historian Orlando Figes has noted that the English, French, and Russian revolutions all occurred in societies in which literacy was approaching 50%. Robert Darnton's book, The Revolutionary Temper, chronicles the chaos unleashed on the old regime in France by the age of print. Knowledge spread through French society with disastrous effect. Political prisoners wrote best-selling memoirs publicizing their unjust incarceration by the state. Ordinary people consumed pamphlets about the exorbitant and unjust wealth enjoyed by aristocrats. The government's disastrous finances were suddenly debated by an incredulous and furious public rather than behind closed doors in the back rooms of Versailles. Meanwhile, the analytic, critical modes of thinking began to eat away at the mystical and emotional underpinnings of the old order. The philosophies and radical thinkers of the Enlightenment, supported by a growing middle-class readership, began to ask the kinds of critical questions that are preeminently print-based in their tone. Where does power come from? Why should men have so much more than others? Why aren't all men equal? It is worth noting that this highly simplified account clearly excludes many of the factors that shape the unfolding history: economics, climate, individual men and women, blind chance. Print alone cannot usher in peace and democracy. Witness the consequences of the Russian Revolution. And print cannot abolish the innate human tendencies toward partisanship and violence. Witness the aftermath of the French Revolution. Print is certainly not immune to fake news and conspiracy theories. Witness the lead-up to the French Revolution. But you do not have to believe print is a perfect and uncorruptible system of communication to accept it is almost certainly a necessary precondition of democracy. In Amusing Ourselves to Death, Neil Postman argues that democracy and print are virtually inseparable. An effective democracy presupposes a reasonably informed and somewhat critical citizenry capable of understanding and debating the issues of the day in detail and at length. Where's that society? Democracy draws immeasurable strength from print. The old dying world of books, newspapers, and magazines, with its tendency to foster deep knowledge, logical argument, critical thought, objectivity, and dispassionate engagement. In this environment, ordinary people have the tools to understand their rulers, to criticize them, and perhaps to change them. Postman cites the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858, in which both presidential candidates spoke at incredible length and in remarkable detail, as one of the summits of print culture. Their arrangement provided that Douglas would speak first for 1 hour. Lincoln would take an hour and a half to reply. Douglas, a half hour to rebut Lincoln's reply. Can you imagine that today? This debate was considerably shorter than those to which the two men were accustomed. On October 16, 1854, in Peoria, Illinois, Douglas delivered a 3-hour address to which Lincoln, by agreement, was to respond. When Postman was writing in the late 1980s, such debates were already impossible to imagine. Ironically, the televised debates that he criticized as degraded, uninformative, and over-emotional strike 21st century viewers as almost comically civilized and high-minded. Look at this, the far-right vote share by TikTok interest in Romania. Politics in the age of the short-form video favors heightened emotion, ignorance, and unevidenced assertions. Such circumstances are highly propitious. It's not propitious. Propitious. I don't know. Alvaro, do you know that one? Propitious for charismatic charlatans. I guess it is propitious for charismatic charlatans. Inevitably, parties and politicians hostile to democracy are flourishing in the post-literate world. TikTok usage correlates with increased vote share for populist parties in the far right. TikTok, as the writer Ian Leslie puts it, is rocket fuel for populists. Why does TikTok benefit populists disproportionately? Because almost by definition, populism thrives on emotion, not thoughts, on feelings, not sentences. Populists specialize in providing that rush of certainty you get when you know you're right. They don't want you to think. Thinking is where certainty goes to die. The rational, dispassionate, print-based liberal democratic order may not survive this revolution. The big tech companies like to see themselves as invested in spreading knowledge and curiosity. In fact, in order to survive, they must promote stupidity. The tech oligarchs have as much of a stake in the ignorance of the population as the most reactionary, feudal autocrat. Dumb rage and partisan thinking keep us glued to our phones. And where the old European monarchies had to often ineptly try and censor dangerously critical material, the big tech companies ensure our ignorance much more effectively by flooding our culture with rage, distraction, and irrelevance. These companies are actively working to destroy human enlightenment and usher in a new dark age. The Dark Enlightenment. Read about that. I've done a piece on that as well. The screen revolution will shape our politics as profoundly as the reading revolution of the 18th century. Without the knowledge and without the critical thinking skills instilled by print, many of the citizens of modern democracies find themselves as helpless and as credulous as medieval peasants, moved by irrational appeals and prone to mob thinking. The world after print increasingly resembles the world before print. Superstitions and anti-democratic thinking flourish. Scholarship in our universities is shaped by rigid partisanship, not by tolerance and curiosity. Our art and literature is cruder and more simplistic. Many people are now as suspicious of vaccines as the uneducated yokels of the 18th century, satirized by cartoonist James Gilray more than 200 years ago. As power, wealth, and knowledge concentrate at the top of society, an angry, divided, and uninformed public lacks a way to understand or analyze or criticize or change what is going on. Instead, more and more people are impressed by the kinds of highly emotional, charismatic, and mystical appeals that were the foundation of power in the age before widespread literacy. Just as the advent of print dealt the final death blow to the decaying world of feudalism, so the screen is destroying the world of liberal democracy. As tech companies wipe out literacy and middle-class jobs, we may find ourselves in a second feudal age. Or it may be that we are entering a political era beyond our imagining. Whatever happens, we are already seeing the world we once knew melt away. Nothing will ever be the same again. Welcome to the Post-Literate Society. Well, everybody, thought that would be something, food for thought. I mean, I've been surrounded by books my whole life. I often opine that it's shocking to me that especially fans don't read. In my mind, the new Stephen King book was as important as the new Star Wars movie. It really was. I mean, they both, as a matter of fact, I read the entirety of Firestarter in line to The Empire Strikes Back. That's a true story. I mean, not in one sitting, probably over 3 sittings, because I used to go see The Empire Strikes Back every week the summer it was out in 1980. And I spent a lot of time in line because I had to get the same seat every time. But running to the bookstore was as much a part of my youth as running to the comic book store, running to the record store, or going to the movies. As a matter of fact, I dare say I might have read, I don't think I've read more books than I've seen movies, but it's got to be close. Anyway, what do you guys think? Is anybody still watching this show? I have no idea. But you know what? I'm bringing you a fantastic guest, a man who's actually written a novel, is working on another right now, and knows a lot because he's analyzed the great works of science fiction in various magazines and on his Substack, which I recommend all of you go to right now. Alvaro, welcome to Robservations. Once again, it's great to see you. And look what's behind you. Look at the glorious... I have that Imagination art book that's right there on the edge of the frame on the left. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me back on, Rob. And just a few comments on this article that you read. First of all, I just want to say, thundered one German clergyman is a lovely turn of phrase, which I did not expect to encounter today.
Me neither. I was always looking for something good, fun to read, so here you go.
You mentioned new Stephen King book used to be a thing. We should probably point out that Joe Hill has a new book out called King's Sorrow,
which I just got.
Awesome. Yeah, it's getting really good notices. So,
and it's got a wild premise.
Yes.
I got to delve into it.
Yeah, I'm excited. I also wanted to mention, just based on the essay that you were reading, that there was a subsection of it called The Moronic Inferno. And I will point out, because it's a slightly older book that maybe some of your viewers are not familiar with, The Moronic Inferno was a title that was used as a reference in a collection of essays by Martin Amis. And,
wow.
Yeah, it's got a lot of good pieces in where he talks about other writers.
Kingsley Amis's son.
Yeah, that's right. He's better known as a novelist, but he has some very acerbic and good books of criticism. And there was a particularly fun piece in Moronic Inferno about Brian De Palma. I think it was called Brian De Palma, the Movie Brute. So, also, you mentioned at the beginning, the interview with the author of We Need to Talk About Kevin. Now, I've shared this with you, but I want to say as well on the show, Die My Love, the new film by Lynn Ramsey, who
that J Law's in, yeah.
Yep, directed the adaptation of We Need to Talk About Kevin, and then also directed You Were Never Really Here. That is my second most anticipated movie of the year. It's based on a novel by Ariana Harwitz, I believe her name is.
Oh, I thought Lionel Shriver wrote that. I'm mistaken then.
Yeah, so I wanted to circle back to that. I haven't read the novel, but I'm very much looking forward to this new Lynn Ramsey film. And my most anticipated movie of the year was actually Hallow Road by Babak Anvari. He brought us Under the Shadow and Wounds, which I thought were really, really interesting horror movies. And I was on a podcast a while back called the Necronomicon, C-O-M, not C-O-N, Necronomicon podcast, talking about the social commentary of Wounds. So if anybody's interested in that, I believe that was eventually uploaded to YouTube. But I think that the reason you probably wanted me on here today was because we're going to help to solve the problem, or part of the problem, that was so eloquently elucidated in this article. And we're going to talk about books, and we're going to recommend books, and we're going to recommend books that recommend other books. So,
And also all horror themed for Halloween.
Yes, absolutely.
But before we get to these books, which you suggested in fascinating list, I got to talk to you about your love of the Scream franchise. And you wrote an article, you sent it to me, it came out October 20, yesterday. It came out yesterday on your Substack. You published it, called Your Favorite Scary Movie. And I was going to read it. I don't need to read it because you're here. But this is a great article. And again, your Substack, for those of you who might want to see it, here it is. Underneath there, it's your name, alvarozinasmaro.substack.com. You've got a great name for your Substack. What's it called?
The Gulf of Selves, which actually kind of ties to the theme of the article that you were reading earlier as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's good stuff. And this is a great article. Now, how come such a learned man such as yourself loves the Scream franchise as much as you do? And is Scream 2 actually better than Scream 1?
Well, I will say that Wes Craven was actually a very learned fella.
He was.
And a lot of people don't know that. I think was one of the bullet points in my article. I, reference trivia and other information. The title of the article is Your Favorite Scary Movie, which in fact is the title of one of the books that we want to talk about today, right here. This is a book published by Ashley Collins. And
Oh, you know what I just realized? Hang on. I cut you off, I forgot to put your voice in here, so I can add you. Sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, no problem. So we were one of the things I was talking about is that Wes Craven came at things from a particularly sort of intellectual background in a lot of ways. And I think that there's a special magic that happens when you take his direction and his sense of aesthetics and you combine them with Kevin Williamson as a screenplay writer, whose tone and approach is not so intellectual, but is actually informed by lots of different influences as well. So I think what's I mentioned several points in this article about what I believe makes the Scream series very distinctive. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will say that I think that possibly with Final Destination being a close rival, the Scream series might be the horror film series that has more than 4 entries that is most consistent in all of horror history.
Wow.
And I think part of it is because Wes Craven directed the first 4 films, which just thinking about that, that's pretty unusual, I would say, for a horror franchise. And even when Kevin Williamson was a little bit more distant from the material, the tone that he set and the continuity of that tone was really preserved and championed by Wes Craven. And some of the folks who have been working on the more recent films have really championed being consistent in that way. So I think, one of the things that Kevin Williamson talks about the book is the diversity of influences that he had bubbling around and swirling around in his head for years, or for quite a while before he actually wrote the screenplay, which he did in 3 days. And, one of them is Agatha Christie. And I think that that's fascinating because you can see how it affects the narrative structure of the original Scream and the subsequent entries. It's sort of structured as a whodunit from one perspective. But he was also influenced by the musical, Sondheim musical, Into the Woods. And, the thing that it seems like he took away from that was examining the rules of a genre, talking about the rules of particular stories that happen, in one of these offsets or branches of populist storytelling. And I think those two things, which are kind of unlikely, when you think about them coming together, are very well merged. Now, in terms of your other question, do I think that Scream 2 is better than Scream? No. There are people in the book.
There are people that do. I learned that from your article.
Yeah, and there's a couple of others who make that claim. I think Scream is still is the best in the series, but I am very curious to see what Kevin Williamson is going to do now that he's coming back to the franchise as a director. And something that I don't mention in the article is that Wes Craven was in fact reluctant to take on Scream. He initially passed on the film, which under most circumstances that would be the end of it, right? I mean, if a director passes, they'll look for somebody else. But a unique set of circumstances had that conversation continue, and then they circled back to him, and eventually he ended up doing it. And part of his reluctance was because he didn't want to, he was trying to distance himself from horror at that point. He'd done a lot of it, and he had ambitions to work in other genres and outside of genre, just in drama altogether. So there's an interesting sort of historical parallel where Kevin Williamson originally did not want to direct Scream 7 either. And they sort of circled back to him and gave him some compelling reasons, and he agreed to do it. So I think that it's kind of crazy, going on 30 years, $1 billion, and one of the most consistent horror franchises, but not necessarily the one that people talk about the most, because there's a lot of heavy play for Friday the 13th, Halloween, Chucky, and so on and so forth, Elm Street.
Yeah, I mean, look, you and I went and saw Friday the 13th 3D in the theater a couple weeks ago, and it doesn't really hold up. Look, I've never been. My problem with slasher movies in general is so many of them aren't really about anything. There's no underlying, meaning behind them. I get it. There's John Carpenter's Halloween. Even when you hear the teacher talking about fate and things like that in the classroom, it's like, oh, there's something to chew on that comes from an off-screen voice as we look at Laurie Strode looking outside her classroom window, and I think you can imbue Halloween, at least the first one especially, with some kind of meaning. That's the whole trope of kids are going to have sex and then they die and all that. But I don't think that was a trope, but that doesn't really mean anything. It was sort of imbued with meaning later, but it was just a titillation factor. They were cannon fodder, and you could do more interesting things. But the Scream franchise, especially the first movie, I thought worked both as a send-up and a parody, but also it was a great horror movie in its own right. It had a really interesting surprise that has become even more chilling when you consider it came out before Columbine happened.
Which was the reason, incidentally, that the original screenplay for Scream 3 had to be scrapped.
Right, exactly. And it's chilling when you go back and look at the Scream franchise in that context, and what's happened in high school. So this book you would recommend Ashley Cullen's book, your favorite scary movie?
Heartily, yeah, absolutely. And again, one of the famous lines from the original Scream is about movies, the line about psychos, right? So if I want to quote it correctly, it's movies don't create psychos, movies make psychos more creative. There's a sort of way to condense the theme. I mean, people talk about how the original Halloween can be construed thematically as being a commentary on the randomness of evil. The fact that there's no clear agenda, no clear motivation. And there are some filmmakers that have given us modern versions of that, like Brian Bertino with his Strangers. That I do think that there's a certain power to that theme. But one of the things that I appreciate about the Scream franchise is, by its very nature, each movie has a different theme and a different killer or killers. And that makes it unique in terms of horror franchises as well. But it's not an anthology series. There's still a continuity of the characters. And yeah.
By the way, if anyone wants to read your great article, it is in the description for the show. You can go down in the description and find the link to your Substack article on Scream. So please do so, because it's a great article, great piece, as everything you write is, very much worth everyone's while. So you have a number of books. I mean, all of these books, this list of books, I don't have any of them. And I want to buy them all after you sent them to me. And I went to Amazon and read what's next. What's next on this list?
Well, So I would say next we should probably talk about a book called Why I Love Horror, which is a collection of nonfiction. It's an essay collection, and essentially it compiles the thoughts of a lot of hot writers today on why they love horror, just as the title suggests. And I'll say, just by way of
And
background,
it looks like it's got the John Carpenter font, which
Yes.
is like Albertus. Albertus
Yeah.
is the Carpenter font, right?
yeah, and the cover design made me immediately think of the Babadook. I don't know if that's what it elicits for you.
Oh,
as well.
totally.
But I was just going to say, I really enjoy reading nonfiction about genre, and it's
Me
something
too.
that I think doesn't get enough discussion. So, besides writing for my Substack, I write for a number of other publications, and I recently wrote an essay about a nonfiction book called "Amazing Worlds of Science Fiction and Science Fact" by Keith Cooper. That was that article just came out, or that book review just came out in the October 2025 issue of Locus. And Locus is a great magazine. Encourage everyone that wants to read about science fiction and fantasy to subscribe to it.
It's
or
also
check
been
it out
around
online.
for decades.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, it's basically, it's almost like what would be the literary magazine equivalent of Locus? Like
that's a
some
good
would it
question.
be the New Yorker? Is it the New
Yeah,
Yorker
something
of
like-
sci-fi?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except it doesn't have fiction. That's the only
No.
difference. But yeah, it's like the Publishers Weekly of
Right.
of
There you
science
go.
fiction.
There you go.
Yeah. So anyway, for folks who are maybe not into horror, but who are interested in nonfiction, Amazing Worlds of Science Fiction, Science Fact, Keith Cooper, really interesting. And eventually that article will pop up on the Locus website. So anyway, coming back to this book, Why I Love Horror, I thought this was a really interesting question. And, for fans of horror, they've probably been exposed to interviews with Stephen King over the years.
Sure.
And this is something that Stephen King has talked about, where people will ask him, so, what was your childhood like? And there seems to be a clear subtext there, or implication, that there was something really messed up that must have happened to him for him to end up writing the things that he writes about. And I think that this book sets out to examine that and, in a way, refute it and possibly acknowledge it as well. Is it the case that one has to suffer terrible experiences in order to be compelled to write horror or to be drawn towards horror? In the case of some authors, it certainly is. And there are a couple of essays that deal with some pretty heavy personal trauma. The editor wisely, provides a little warning ahead of time, but in a lot of cases it doesn't. And just to give you a couple of reasons why I think this book is worth checking out. First of all, you're going to probably encounter some great writers that you haven't heard about. You may have heard about Brian Keene, who's in the essay. You've probably heard about Stephen Graham Jones, who's in the essay. You've probably heard about You've probably heard about Victor Laval, who has an essay. Grady Hendrix, Paul Tremblay.
Yeah,
Josh
Grady
Mellon.
Hendrix. Every time his
Yeah.
name comes up, I get mad. Just saying.
However, you may not have heard of Cynthia Pelayo, or you may not have heard of Nuzo Ono, or Rachel Harrison, or Alma Katsu, I believe is how you pronounce her name, or Mary San Giovanni. So there's a number of other writers who are also very interesting in how they examine, or they take on this challenge of answering the question, why I love horror. And I have to say, the collection, it has all of these different approaches, not only in the reasons of why these folks love horror, but also in the style of the essays. Some are very informal, some are a little bit more academic, some are heavily autobiographical. And the piece by Josh Mallerman is absolutely wonderful, because he writes it as a conversation that he has with a stranger on a train. And you don't know if this actually happened or not. And it could have happened, but it might not have happened. And he rings that to great effect. Also, in the Brian Keene essay that kicks things off, one of the things that I like about these types of things, elements that I like about these types of books, is that you get to hear about the influences and the things that people grew up reading, which are often different from the ones that you know. Sure, a lot of these writers mention 20 horror writers that aficionados are already familiar with. But Brian Keene has a little section where he's talking about comic books that got him really excited and into storytelling and super enthused about pop culture. And he mentioned comic books that I'd never heard of, like Kamandi, The Last Boy on Earth.
Dude, I got the entire. Come on,
You got the omnibus, right?
I got the omnibus right over here. Well, it's right there.
Well, let me give you a few more. Okay, so how about Dagar the Invincible?
I don't have that.
How about, did you ever hear of Turok, the Son of Stone?
Of course.
Okay. Did you know that Marvel's Bizarre Adventures had an adaptation of Stephen King's The Lawnmower Man?
I did. Yes, I did.
All right,
I'm older than you. I'm older
true.
than you.
Yeah,
So,
these were a lot of things that were out when I was like 1 or 2.
Oh, it's that's hard to hear, man. It's hard to hear.
But anyway, as I was mentioning, a lot of trivia like that is sort of exciting. It opens up avenues of exploration for these cool little less explored paths in genre history. And again, a lot of great observations. A couple of quotes that I just wanted to review very briefly to give people a sense of maybe some of the answers without going into the full theme of every essay. But one of the authors said that he loves horror because horror doesn't flinch. I like that.
I like that too.
He said it doesn't lie or sugarcoat or wrap the world in pretty packaging. And another one of the authors talks about how horror is possibly the most honest genre, which I think is an interesting perspective as well.
I would tend to agree with that. I mean, I think that honesty is what makes horror work. You have to delve into the uncomfortable nature of being a human being in order to sort of create. I mean, it shines a light on things we might be not so eager to want to share with other people.
One of the things that I think is fascinating about horror is that it can both, when it depicts things that are clearly sort of ghoulish and just outlandishly, over the top in their absurdity, that are not intrinsically scary, but uses them to generate horror stories. In that way, it's sort of a refuge or a way of thinking that things that are other and freakish and bizarre are fine. They're part and parcel of the world, if not literally in some psychological sense. And that can make for a lot of escapist fun. But like you were saying, you can also have the vision of horror that is more authentic and more biting. And I won't spoil who, but one of the essayists talks about how you actually have to be careful with really transgressive horror, because when you consume that stuff, if it's well done, you don't know before you go in how it's going to change you, and you might come out a slightly different person in a way that you were not prepared for. And I think that's a very astute observation, and it really, I mean, it's obviously something that when people talk about the power of art, it's sort of part of that same argument, right? I think it, again, particularly applies to transgressive horror. That was another perspective that I appreciated. I think it was Mallerman in his train set conversation. He had two things that really stuck with me. One of them was that horror is it's a Trojan horse. It's a way of Trojan horsing your childhood into adulthood. Because when you're,
I love that idea.
Great?
I love that idea.
When you're young, all of the things that scare you, the reason that they're so effective at scaring you a lot of the times is because you're just very open-minded, right? You're just fascinated by things that are weird and wondrous.
Well, like
you don't like rationalize how likely is this.
I discovered David Cronenberg, for instance. The first time I saw a Cronenberg film was I saw They Came From Within as the second bill for Motel Hell at a drive-in. And, to me, I was already a horny little kid, but, and that movie is a very horny horror film, but it was very transgressive in what it was doing and the way it was doing it. And, that movie really imprinted on me for that, that very reason. I don't know what that says about me, but I totally agree with that. I think that, unfortunately, let me ask you a question. I don't know why people, it's funny when I hate when people say that. Just ask the fucking question. Do you think that horror has gone soft in recent years?
No, not at all.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I think that,
I should say. Let me go further. Do you think horror has gone soft cinematically? That cinema horror has gone soft?
I think that the percentage of horror films that get, let's just call it mainstream play or wide distribution or big marketing pushes, I think that there, to some degree, there's a greater percentage of those movies that are maybe less transgressive, less the type of horror that we were talking about that's serious and more artsy. But I would also say that there's more films in the A24 mold that are maybe explicitly not horror, but that do some of the same things that horror does, and that do it in a very effective and disturbing way.
Sure.
Now, I think that there's a number of horror movies that are, largely pass under the radar. It comes back a little bit to, this could be sort of a corollary to Sturgeon's law. So we talked about, for the forever era, the 10% of everything is great.
So Theodore Sturgeon, who is a science fiction writer, did say that 10% of everything, 90% of everything is crap. So we're going to do a show called the Forever Era, just so people know, where we celebrate the 10%.
And I think maybe there's something similar that goes on in terms of what you might call more hardcore horror versus commercial or softer horror. It could be that there's just that ratio, right, where there's always been a smaller percentage that is much more hard hitting, and because all of it, there's just a lot more horror these days. It's harder to find maybe some of that stuff that doesn't have as much promotion or as much visibility. But I think that there's something else that's going on too, which is that as audiences have become more savvy to the rules of horror, partially because of films like Scream and all of the movies that capitalized on, that model of commenting on the genre while being in the genre, in a way, it's harder for horror filmmakers to come up with things that might be immediately hooky or get the studio approval on a mass level that are going to be as hard hitting as they once were, right? I mean, you can't really do Jaws again. You can certainly do iterations or variations on it, but we already have Jaws. We have Alien, we have The Exorcist, we have Rosemary's Baby. There are just certain things that we already have great versions of them. And the more great versions that you have, I think to some degree it becomes a little bit trickier to deliver new templates that are at that same level.
Well, let me ask you. Okay,
you're not going to ask me this.
So here, I have to tell you, I think a lot about The Substance, the movie The Substance, which I think is not a very good movie that I do kind of love. And I think it's a movie that's masquerading as a good movie, but it's not a very good movie because it doesn't develop its themes. Like what happens in the film is very sort of superficial in a way. And I was waiting to be taken somewhere really far away. I was expecting to really. How do you feel about The Substance? We've never really talked about it.
No, The Substance was not one of my favorite films of that year. I do think that it develops its themes, but I did not personally find the themes that interesting, or let's just say enticing in terms of being new or in terms of being fresh. But outside of that, because that's not typically, I don't need great themes in a horror film. I mean, the specific type of film, if it has great themes, more power to it, but they're not a requirement for me to enjoy it. The thing that I bounced against with The Substance was the aesthetics of the film, because I found that the camera tone was so heightened And the way that the editing and the way that things were directed it was dialed up at such a loud volume that I found that after a while my brain compensated for that loud volume, and the whole thing just became very quiet. So there wasn't a lot of dynamic range, there wasn't a lot of contrast, and
Right.
that's one of the things that I seek in a horror, particularly in something that I'm hoping. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, I was mentioning Hallow Road. So Hallow Road is basically, it's a two-hander. Most of the film is two actors in a car, and you would just think, well, how could that possibly be scary? Now, they're driving somewhere for a specific reason, and there's a voice that they're talking to, on the phone as they're driving. And as you get more information about the situation, you start to understand that there's something deeply discomforting about what's happening. And there's real emotional stakes, and it's something that could happen. At least it's plausible in the initial setup. And there is something about the fact that when one of the actors raises their voice or something goes a little bit sideways, because there's so much precision and there's so much care that's being put on the modulation of the performances and the tone of the film, even small variations, I think, go a long way. So that's one of the things that I think works very well in that film. And I have to say, another film that we haven't talked about, but which I think, in the same way that I was saying, Scream might be one of the most consistent horror franchises of all time that has more than four entries. I think perhaps one of the greatest prequels, if not maybe the greatest prequel ever made, is The First Omen, which is also a horror movie.
Now I talk about him a lot because I know him, but Steve Asbell, the president of 20th Century Studios, I call him the quiet king of franchises, because he was able to sort of, he started as an intern at Fox, like in the 90s, worked his way up, became president of the studio. He gets sold, the studio gets sold to Disney, and he's still there. And he's Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, Alien Romulus, and I would say Predator Badlands. I think I like what the Predator films, going from Prey to Killer of Killers to now Badlands. He's probably done the best. I mean, it's not up to him, but he's kind of shackled in terms of he can't go off the reservation. I know he loves horror. I know he loves Star Trek. He's a great guy, terrific guy. But he was responsible for The First Omen. And I'm with you. I saw that film directed by a woman. I was like, this movie kind of kicks a bunch of ass. And of all the franchises that he resurrected, he got Hellraiser resurrected on TV, which I didn't think was perfect, but I was like, this is not bad. I'm like, all right, good for you. But The First Omen was, I thought, terrific.
Yeah, I really enjoyed like you said, I really enjoyed the Hellraiser film as well.
Yep, me too.
I wish that it had the chance to see it theatrically. The First Omen, it played really well on a large screen with great sound, and I think the attention to detail in terms of emulating some of those, or simulating, maybe is a better way to phrase it, the techniques that were being used in the 70s. You probably notice it right away when it has these sudden zooms and all these things that you don't normally see in movies today. But I think The First Omen also handles its tone and the variations in tone pretty well. I felt like with The Substance, it sort of ramped up in the first 2 or 3 minutes and then just stayed at 150 the entire time. And I will say that I saw it, I think it was opening weekend, and the crowd responded very well to it, but they responded very well to it in the way almost of a comedy, not in the way of, I have to look away now because this is so hard hitting that I can't take it.
Right.
So it had a different, it was so grand guignol that it kind of became slapstick in a way. Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, I want to say, coming back to the why I love horror, I really thought that was a great phrase. Again, the Trojan horsing childhood into adulthood. Another point that is made in that same piece is it relates to the idea that with horror, you sort of turn down the lights so things get dimmer, shadows grow, longer, and as that happens, your imagination has more room to expand. there's more space for your mind to play because you can see less. I like the literal, rendition of that image. And I think, shadows obviously very related to horror just in general, but there's something about the lack of detail that happens in shadows that forces your mind to try to fill in the things
Sure.
that are missing. And the, being with the darkness in that way, sort of confronting the darkness and moving in that space. I think that that's something that is an important element of horror. And one last thing that I'll say too is, a lot of horror operates on this idea that there's life beyond death, or there are supernatural forces of some ilk. There are, things beyond our comprehension. And if you think about it from a more rational point of view, that's actually a very optimistic perspective.
I've always said that.
Right?
Horror is the most optimistic and most moral of genres because it fulfills the promise of an afterlife, because half your villains come from that afterlife.
That's right. So the way that Mallerman, I think that the way that he phrases it is just superb. He says, "What is more optimistic than more?"
Right. Exactly. Well, listen, I got some super chats. I'd love to throw them, since you're here, throw them your way. First, our own philosopher, the philosopher of this channel, the official philosopher of the Burnettwork, Darth Plato, says the importance of literacy. Take the Scottish Enlightenment. Beforehand, Scotland was backward, poor, rural, with hardly any trade. Scotland gained industry and innovation second to none. Scottish thinkers were the leading intellectuals in Great Britain. Uh-oh. A bunch of people from the UK are going to get pissed. But that's very, I did not know that. That's very interesting. I mean, I still come from the Saturday Night Live school, or the school of Mike Myers. If it's not Scottish, it's crap. Well, apparently intellectuals, yes. Colt sends in a tip and says, Rob, your axiom is never put your universe before your characters. Though you've supported Gunn's handling of the DC universe while he's been the worst offender of this axiom, why? He had an entire universe in creation before Superman was even done filming. Well, I mean, okay, that is true. That is my Burnett axiom, but I also think James Gunn is a great, he first and foremost is concerned with character. All things being equal, I worked on a movie with James Gunn that he wrote and was in called The Specials, very low budget superhero movie from 25 years ago, where he played Minute Man, and everyone thinks he's Minute Man. That's kind of funny. If you haven't seen The Specials, but I would say this. I mean, I think that James Gunn has always been character-oriented, and if you look at his films, there's a consistency to his work. And the fact that he's allowing, I mean, the real question is what I think is not fair yet is we have not seen what other filmmakers are doing with the new DC universe. We haven't seen Lanterns. We haven't seen Supergirl. We haven't seen Clayface. And that will be the real test. And remember, his task was by definition to create a new universe. Now, this is before, like, that was his mandate, make a universe work. So I would say outside, if you're making a one-off, you should be concerned with that film. But James Gunn was specifically tasked with the idea or the to make a universe. It wasn't just about his individual film. And so he's in a different, I would not apply the Burnett axiom of don't put your universe before your characters or your story. In his case, that's exactly what he was tasked to do. So whether he succeeds in that remains to be seen, because we've only seen what he's done. But I was just thinking as you were saying that if Superman was the only film, if the entire universe just stopped here,
And if that was the only thing that we had to go by, I don't think necessarily people who watch Superman, James Gunn's Superman, would think based on that one film that the film puts its universe ahead of its story or its characters. So I think that the axiom holds true to that one particular film. It just doesn't hold true to the entire, like you said, the entire task that he's been given.
Yeah, we have to see. We have to see if it all works. I think the real pushback, and I'll say this myself, I'm a big fan of James Gunn's work. I don't know if I'm necessarily a fan of the direction that he's taken the DC universe in. I'll be honest. I am more a fan of, I was watching, there's a moment in Richard Donner's Superman. It's a tour de force tracking shot that doesn't get enough credit, where you go from, you have Perry White's office and you go all the way through the Daily Planet. You follow Clark and Lois all the way. She goes into the bathroom. The door gets slammed and his jacket's stuck in there. It's an amazing scene. I think that Richard Donner's tone is more my speed. Somewhere between what Richard Donner and Zack Snyder were doing is where I live in terms of a DC universe. James Gunn is more outre, I guess would be the word. More so than I would like. But the thing is, other people are now going to come in. Like I think what's really going to define the universe for me is lanterns, because the Green Lantern Corps, the Green Lanterns are totally out there in terms of sci-fi fantasy. But the only picture we have of lanterns is two guys looking like in normal everyday clothes walking down a lonely road. That's the only thing that we've seen. That is the furthest thing away from lanterns that if you asked me to come up with it, and I've always loved Green Lantern, that's the last thing I would have said would be our first look, but that's what our first look is. And that look to me is right where I live. So I'm really curious to see where it goes. So I don't think the jury is out on this yet. And I think if James Gunn's first DC movie was not Superman, it was something else, we would have a lot less discourse in the fan community about, because people are angry because everyone has this ideal of Superman. But that's, Jermaninen, all the way from Finland, says, sorry to hear about your sister. Hope you're well. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. To be honest, everyone, it's a very surreal experience losing a sibling that is younger than you in the way we lost her. And it's a really hard thing. It's hard to reconcile for someone like myself whose storytelling is so important to, because you want to contextualize her loss in a story. And a lot of the stories that I'm coming up with aren't great. And I'm looking for a lesson to be found in all of this. And it's hard. It's hard. It's difficult. But I really do appreciate the outpouring of sympathy and people who have been offering me condolences is overwhelming. And, if there was ever a time, it's just nice to know, somebody called this audience on Twitter today. They accused me of having a brain-dead audience. And I immediately clapped back and said, I have the best, most educated audience in the YouTube space, this YouTube space, of all. And this person wanted to stream with me. Said, well, the adults are here, so I want to come on and have this conversation with you. And I'm like, you know what? You've insulted my audience. I will never stream with you. Ever. And part of that has been the response that I've received since I dropped the news of my sister passing. So thanks to all of you, because not a lot of people have the kind of just random support system. People have come out and offered condolences, and I didn't even know I needed that, but I did. And I thank you very much for that. Mr. Z, speaking of which, friend of the channel, has been here for 15 months, says, just tuned in 20 minutes late. Condolences again on your loss. Is there a fundraising page for expenses and such that I can donate to? Wishing you strength. Warm regards, Rocky. No, we don't have any kind of Unfortunately, my family had arranged for an educational fund for her two sons, which is pretty good. So they're at least for a while, or taking care of at least for both of them. One of them is going to go into college. The other one's in education right now. So they're taken care of, which is great. But I really appreciate that. Thank you. D's Webos has been a member for 36 months. Fearless Wolf 5928 says, I'm doing my BA and I handed my essay in on the Gutenberg Press and the Reformation. Your post-literate piece, Rob, really echoed what I've been studying. Love to hear that. And it sounds like your academia is working for you, which is nice to hear.
By the way, isn't that a great immediate demonstration that other person was wrong? I mean, there's your audience right there.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. There's my audience right there. Yeah, it was like, it's so, but this is what I would say in what the article that I read was about. That's maybe why I was inspired to read it, was because it's people just say shit now without thinking it through, they just say it, and it has no basis in fact. And if there's one thing I would furiously defend is the audience for this channel, which I'll put it pound for pound or intellect for intellect up against anyone else's audience.
Letter for letter.
Letter for letter. There, pound for pound might not be the right way to put it. Letter for letter. Certainly not in my case. But Fearless Wolf, thank you for that. Brian Erdy says that he also has the Art of Imagination oversized book, and he's certain that it would not surprise me at all. No, Brian Erdy, of course, made the opening of this that I use, the CBS movie beginning that I use now in I asked him, he showed it to me on a video he made of his collection. I asked him if I could steal it. He said, okay. So I gave him credit in the credits. The Real Thomas Logan says, J-Law Kane says, J-Law will probably win Oscar #2 for Die My Love. Could be. Darth Plato does not like, Darth Plato says, citing Orlando is it Figgis? Undermine the entire article's credibility. Oh, come on now. I don't know much about him, but you can't say the article still stands just because you don't like one person he cited. That might be true. I don't know. You are the official historian of this channel, so I'd have to do some deep dives. I don't know who that person is, but I'll have to look into it. Royston Bailey says, how to tell if someone... Wait, hang on. How to tell... Wait, I was right there. How to tell if someone reads and writes only on online social media. Your is spelled Y-O-U-R. Should've is should've instead of should have. Loose, and apostrophizing plurals. Well, there you go. There and there, your and your. It's irksome. Doc Civil says, so much going on in tonight's show. You made me think of this saying. The wise man doubts himself often. The fool, never. Well, I love hearing that. Warren writes a $20 super chat. He writes, I was watching All Good Things tonight after a few years and loving it. What do you think Kurtzman's takeaway is from this finale, assuming he even watched it? Well, I don't think he watched it. I mean, look, I think All Good Things is one of the great finales of any show. John Campy even agrees with me. It's a wildly ambitious 90 minutes of TV. And I think that, here's the thing. I think that episode where they ripped off Balance of Terror and brought the two Captain Pikes in, I think they did it without understanding anything about what made All Good Things great. And it's unfortunate. But All Good Things still, from the opening sequence when Picard comes running out into the hallway, and screaming at Deanna, like, what's going on? What time? And you're immediately totally captivated to the end when he comes into the poker game. I mean, if you were to just watch that and you'd never seen an episode of Star Trek ever before, and that was the only thing you ever saw, you would get that show. You would totally understand what Next Generation was about. It would draw you in. There's so much going on in that show, even if you'd never met Q before. It's just what do you think, Alvaro, about All Good Things?
Well, of course, I think All Good Things is a tremendous piece of science fiction. It won some notable awards. It's very, very well crafted. In the context of the question about Kurtzman, I can't help myself. I will say that in All Good Things, there is the concept of anti-time, right? And anti-time causes things to unhappen. It essentially works it reverses cause and effect. I think Kurtzman's Trek is the anti-time of the franchise.
That's why I love you, man. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, instead of causing things to progress and become more complex and sophisticated, it regresses them and it unmakes them.
Yes. You are right. And it I just don't understand. I don't get it. But I love that you said that. So let's see. That's what that. Oh, we're at the end. I think we've got to. We're caught up on super chats, and that was Warren for that. That's great. So we have more books to talk about. You haven't finished.
We have so many books, Rob. So many books.
So many books and so little time.
So little time. Hopefully my glasses won't fall apart like in the famous Twilight Zone episode. But
why, Helen? Why do you do these things? I mean, that's one of my favorite things. Since I was a little kid, whenever I'd have a fight with a girlfriend or an ex-wife or something, in my mind, I'm hearing Burgess Meredith talking to his wife when he has discovered all the books that she's penned out. And he looks at her and he's just, why, Helen? Why do you do these things? I chuckle every time I think about that. But that episode's probably the most well-known Twilight Zone episode of all.
Yeah.
Time enough at last. Anyway.
So just to close out, before we go to the next volume, to close out on Why I Love Horror, there's also just another selling point to it, which is that in the introduction to each essay, the editor of the book, first of all, recommends one entry-level text by that author, right? So if you don't know where to start with John Langdon or Haley Piper or even Grady Hendrix, you've got a recommendation for fairly accessible book. But then the second step is that she basically says, and if you like this author, you should also try this other author. So for example, with Grady Hendrix, she says, if you like his stuff, you should check out Daniel Kraus. So you basically get an additional 18 recommendations of different authors to explore. So I thought that was pretty neat and worth bringing to the attention of your viewers.
Nice.
All right. So for the next one, if you're ready to turn the page, as it were.
Oh, I'm ready to turn the page.
Let's go to this. Here is my physical version of this book.
Wow, that's a chunky book.
It is. Screen Chill's Companion, 1931 to 1939. Films of the Golden Age of Hollywood Horror. Now, there's actually two books that were published by this author, Chris Fellner, this year. This one came out a little bit earlier in the year, and it's the only one that I have so far. But just recently, the second volume, the companion book, was published, and it's essentially the same thing. It's the Screen Chill's Companion, but it goes from, I believe, 1940 to 1946. And I think that these books are fascinating because they... in each one, he picks essentially the most important films, which is really all of the films, because there weren't that many that are clearly horror. Year by year, he goes through them. So I think there's 70 plus in this first volume. And the way he breaks it down is really cool. He gives you a little bit of background on the film. Typically he includes the posters and some of the production stills, but then this is why it becomes historically interesting. He gives you quotes from what the reviews were at the time, and some of those are actually really hard to find, or you can't necessarily locate them online because, again, you're thinking about reviews of movies from 1932 or whatever. And then he also has little critiques, and then he has postscripts. So I like to occasionally go back and explore older horror films as I do in other genres. In fact, a couple of years ago, I did a piece for my column where I looked at, I think this was in 2023. So I went back and I wanted to see what horror films were like 90 years earlier. 1933. So I picked movies like the original Mystery of the Wax Museum. I picked a movie called Murders in the Zoo. I picked The Secret of the Blue Room, which has a number of remakes. I picked a movie that is called Supernatural, and then also a film called La Llorona. And what was fascinating, and I talk about it in the article, is essentially all of the things that, a majority of what horror is doing today, you can see the roots of it in those movies that I just mentioned. Sure. And so I was excited. I didn't have this book when I wrote that article, but if I'd had it, it would have made it a lot easier to research certain things. And, all of the movies that I just mentioned are in this book except La Llorona. So it's a really good reference volume, especially because, as we've talked about, sometimes when you go back, you want a little bit more of a guide. You want someone to orient you and to help to contextualize the stuff that you're getting into. Sure. And I think that this and like I said, the second volume, they're really well done.
Great choice. I mean, it looks like a big chunky book too. So fascinating. Good stuff.
Okay.
What is next?
Next, we're going from the very old to something that's very, very new. So this talk about large size, coffee table book, huge, right? Horror's New Wave. This book, also just recently published, which I read in like 2 sittings, is about 15 years of Blumhouse. And it's lavishly illustrated. It's really, really beautiful production design. And one of the things that I would say about this book is that even if you're not necessarily the biggest fan of Blumhouse, it's difficult to argue that, Blumhouse, its footprint in commercial horror is vast.
Yeah.
And the author, doesn't go through every single Blumhouse film. They cover a lot of the heavy hitters, right? So this is a book that goes through Paranormal Activity, Insidious, Sinister, The Purge, Split, Get Out, Happy Death Day, The Invisible Man, which, by the way, the Lee Winnell Invisible Man by Blumhouse is one of my all-time favorite horror films. Freaky, the Halloween trilogy, Megan, Ma, and so on and so forth. So I would say for anyone who's interested in how horror, particularly, but just in general, how films are made and a system that is a little bit outside of the mainstream studio system, it's a really fascinating look. And if you're a fan of some of these films, if you're a diehard fan of, I don't know, Five Nights at Freddy's or something, you're going to probably want to pick it up because you're going to get nuggets about earlier versions and challenges during the production and, behind the scenes stories that you're not going to find anywhere else. And the flow is great because each chapter, which is dedicated to one of these movies, starts with a general description. It has a kind of scorecard where it gives you the release date, the production budget, and then the box office. So you very quickly start to see this theme of how Jason and some of the other people that work with him are very disciplined at keeping budgets extremely tight. And sometimes that creates challenges for the filmmakers because they only have 25, 30, 35 days to shoot some fairly complicated movies sometimes.
Sure.
And, those restrictions have often caused more creative decisions to be made than just solving the problem by throwing more money at it. And I think that's an interesting through line as well. So fascinating book.
Yeah, it looks great. I can't wait to get it. I mean, I'm curious because Blumhouse really went a long way toward reinvigorating theatrical horror. Even with things like, people forget Paranormal Activity cost very little money, but it made a lot. Same with Blair Witch, and you know, Jason Blum has done a lot to further a lot of people's careers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the scorecard right here of Paranormal Activity, it lists the official budget as 215,000. Now that was the budget when they reshot certain things.
Yeah, that was after. That was
after the full on, right? But even so, I mean, the box office was 194.2 million according to this book. So,
yeah, making it one of the most successful films ever made
yep.
in terms of budget to return.
And there's a lot of interviews with people, so you get interviews not only with the directors, but often, you know, you get cinematographers, you get writers, you get some of the cast, and that breaks it up. And while obviously the conceit of this book is, you know, heavily promotional, right? It's all about Blumhouse and their achievements, etc. It's not. It has some criticism, and it doesn't, you know, pretend that all of the movies that they've made are great. One of the things that I actually found quite refreshing is that it seems that part of the ethos or the philosophy that animates, you know, the decision making by the people at the top in Blumhouse is, you know, to evaluate the film is basically to say, is this the film that we set out to make? Which
Sure.
Sometimes it does not correlate with box office or even critical reception. But I think as long as they feel like they've achieved the vision that they had, they're successful. And Mike Flanagan, for example, he talks about in the chapter on Ouija, Origin of Evil, which is, again, you know, really unexpectedly high quality prequel, right? He talks about how this model that Blumhouse has is really good at creating a spectrum for risk. Not every movie has to be as successful as every other one, or even completely successful.
Sure.
So I thought that was interesting, and you know, there's a list of a lot of films that are not discussed in detail, and some of them are very interesting as well.
Does it talk about how now Blumhouse has teamed up with James Wan's company, Atomic Monster, at the end? I mean, you've got James Wan, who isn't, you know, the Conjuring. He's done Saw, Insidious, and the Conjuring franchises. I mean, and then Blumhouse is Blumhouse. The two of them together are probably the most successful horror team. I mean, I can't imagine a more vibrant team of horror people than those two teamed up.
It doesn't really get into that a lot. It does talk a little bit about
latter Blumhouse.
You know, it goes into the expansion of Blumhouse with the Halloween films. Whether, you know, whatever your thoughts are on them, certainly
not high. Just saying.
It's certainly a lot of more people became aware of Blumhouse at that point, and then again, other properties like Five Nights at Freddy's. But there were two movies actually, Rob, that I wanted to ask you about that I don't think we've ever talked about. One is The Bay from 2012, Barry Levinson's The Bay.
Huge fan.
Me too.
I'm a huge fan of. So for those of you who don't know, Barry Levinson, it's a found footage thriller about an ecological disaster in this waterfront community. That movie's awesome. I love it. And I you know, when I saw it, I'm like, it's wild. The man who directed Rain Man directed it, you know, and Barry Levinson also directed What Just Happened, you know, the movie about Art Linson's book, which is one of my favorite movies about the making of, well, about Hollywood, about movie making. And he had this period in time where, like, Barry Levinson couldn't get hired, you know, and he went and made a Blumhouse movie. Is there a chapter on that film?
No, unfortunately not. It's one of the ones that's listed, but it doesn't. It's referenced by one of the other filmmakers who says that it's underrated, and I would agree with that. I remember that I thought that it was very uncomfortable to watch. And
oh my God, I loved it.
It's gotten better over time. Right?
Yeah, I love that movie. And I couldn't believe Barry Levinson directed it. I thought it was like a mistake.
Right.
It was one of those things I saw on cable for the first time. And I'm like, wait, what is this?
Okay, and the second one that I'm going to ask you, I'm also a big fan. So just to you know, precede that is Dark Skies. I don't hear a lot of people talking about Dark Skies.
Okay. First of all, who's in Dark Skies?
Who are you thinking of?
Carrie Russell.
Okay, yeah.
I love her. I think Carrie Russell is one of the most underrated actresses in Hollywood. And I think Dark Skies is an exceptional film. I don't think it gets enough credit. You know, people talk more about like Fire in the Sky, the Travis Walton movie that Paramount put out. But Dark Skies has it going on. I mean, it's not The Exorcist, but it's really good. And she's...
Yeah, and it didn't set out to be The Exorcist.
No,
right?
and I have to tell you, I mean, a lot of people don't know this, or maybe people have heard me talk about it, but when I was making my Superman documentary, I went and filmed Brandon Routh's 65 millimeter screen test to potentially be Superman. And he was the only person that Bryan Singer was filming. And who played Lois Lane opposite Brandon Routh in his screen test? Carrie Russell. And so I got to like hang out with her, and I was filming Brandon, and I have to say, she was, I mean, in person, one of the most delightful people I ever met in the entertainment business. She would never remember me. I could remind her of this, and she's like, oh, I remember that. She was a great Lois Lane in those scenes, but she has some, I can understand why she was cast as Felicity. There's something about her. She's one of these human beings that is ethereal in her presence, but also probably very grounded and down to earth in real life. But there's something about her that was great. And I thought she was great in Dark Skies, and I own Dark Skies, and I wish that film more people knew it.
Yeah.
But what did the books? Oh, it didn't say anything about
it. Didn't say. Again, this was one of the ones that was listed. But I think Dark Skies is also a great example of that question that comes up of what are good blends of science fiction and horror.
Yeah.
I think it's very well done. And I will say that when I saw it in the theater, I mean, I'd seen Insidious at this point. So I'd seen at some point, you know, that the music to Insidious was written by Joseph Bishara.
Yeah, Joe.
I hadn't really paid attention. And I remember with Dark Skies, the way that film in the theater, the way that it manipulates frequencies, like those ultra low basses, and then when it goes high as well, combined with the very textured score by Bishara, it kind of blew me away. It was.
I know Joe. And he's a terrific guy. He also played the creature in the Insidious movies. And no, he is a tremendous guy. And he and I used to exchange. He used to send me lists of music I should hear, you know, electronica or things that. He's a great guy. And you know what? He's a true believer, you know, like we are. And he's as much a. Dave Parker on Midnight Metal, directed The Hills Run Red, made his movie. He shot his entire. Dave, the weather. I don't remember the name, what it finally went for, or what it was, because it's been called different things. But he shot Joe Bishara's house. He shot his entire movie with Yvonne in it. I don't know what is it. I think it's Cold Water. The final. I don't want to. If I get the wrong, I'm just gonna say it. To me, in my mind, it's Cold Water. That's what it was shot. That's how I remember it. But I think the name has changed. But anyway, they shot it at Joe Bishara's house.
And I think he did either a song or music for one of the segments, if memory serves, in the new VHS Halloween, which you were just you had a guest on.
Yeah, I can't wait. I haven't seen it yet.
No, me either.
No, Sarah Nicklin was on because she's in one of the segments. So that brings us down. We're getting down to it, but there's one more book left.
Well, there's one more official book, and then there's the secret book.
Oh, right.
I haven't told you.
The secret book.
The secret book is just a tease. So this one I have not read, but as you can see, I've just picked up the hardcover. It's called Scream With Me, and the subtitle is Horror Films and the Rise of American Feminism, 1968 to 1980.
Oh, great.
Eleanor Johnson, I believe that she is a professor at Columbia. But I think that's what I had read. And I think this to me seems like an interesting take on, you know, essentially a number of classic films and how they relate to things that were going on in society that had to do with reproductive rights.
Well, that's
and
interesting. Okay, that's interesting. All right.
Domestic violence, things that were going on in the workplace, and so on and so forth. Essentially takes the Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, Stepford Wives, The Omen, Alien, The Shining, and then she has an epilogue. But I read a sample of this book, and what I appreciated about it was that it is written from a very informed perspective by somebody who's studied this in a lot of detail, but it's still quite accessible. So it's not Johnson in this book, at least again from the sample that I read, isn't sort of writing down at the audience and is not talking about slumming it with horror and sort of just completely reinterpreting these films for the purposes of some academic thesis or whatever. I think that she's genuinely applying a legitimate lens to see if there's new ways of interpreting the films. And I always think that that's exciting. Now, you may not agree. There might be takes in here which strike you as wrong or pretentious or whatever the case might be, but I think it's good food for thought. So I thought it was worth bringing up. And this is a book that, by the way, I may be reviewing for Locus Magazine. We talked about it before. So
let me ask you.
Strike three.
So one of the things that I've lived through now that I didn't expect that I would is growing up when I grew up. Like Fangoria magazine. I bought Fangoria issue 1 off the stands. And people forget that I always ask people, who was on the cover of Fangoria number 1? Do you know?
It was Godzilla.
Yes, it was. Who was on the cover of Fangoria number 4?
That I don't remember.
Mr. Spock. Fangoria didn't quite know what it wanted to be. Starlog magazine, Carrie O'Quinn, they hadn't quite dove into the horror pool. They were hedging their bets. R2 and 3PO were on the cover of I think Fangoria 6. So it wasn't until like the Motel Hell cover, I think it was 9, that they finally went all in. They finally decided what they were. So I bought every issue off the stands. I was a Fangoria fiend. The Hills Run Red, when there was a 5-page article that Rob G, who was part of the Icons of Fright podcast, when he came and interviewed us, to be in Fangoria was one of the highlights of my life. But now, like the new Fangoria and the attitude that people have writing about films that I lived through when they first came out, and people look back now and I feel that there's a lot missing from modern horror film criticism. When people are looking back, and perhaps it's because I don't know if they have the right perspective, and what the right perspective is, I'm not going to say. I don't know what that is, but I find that modern film criticism annoys me because I feel that it's mostly about the reviewer as opposed to the actual film. Little too much of that. How does this... Well, you haven't read the book yet, but how do you feel about modern film criticism, especially genre modern film criticism?
I mean, I think a lot of good criticism is not in print these days, right? A lot of it is user.
But why is that?
Well, because I think part of it ties back to what you were reading in the article before. Attention spans attention is more easily hijacked by things that have audiovisual content. And so as a result, for people who are working purely in print, let's just say you were somebody said, write me an article about this film or a review of this film for Bloody Disgusting, right? Or one of the like main horror venues that does a lot of coverage of movies that are super into genre. Well, somehow that article now has to compete because people have finite time. So how you're going to maybe turn it into a listicle or come up with a very polemical headline or talk about how Scream 3 is actually the best of the Scream movies. You're going to have some quote unquote bad take, which then will become the subject of a video discussing bad takes and showing how good they are, so on and so forth, like an infinite loop. But I think part of that, what I'm trying to get at, is that writers have to compete at the times with other sources of media, and particularly with podcasts. I know a lot of people that will listen to a 3 or 4 hour discussion. Well, not a lot. I know some people that will listen to hours of discussion on films that they like, but they won't read a book, that was put out by, let's just say, the BFI,
Right.
which would be a slender paperback that you could read in less the time than it would take you to listen to that podcast. So again, part of it, I think, is the attention that's influenced how people consume content. I also think that, again, related to the idea of so much content, if you're coming up and you're wanting to break into film criticism and write reviews of really any kind of genre, how do you possibly get up to speed? You can't.
Right.
The most that you can do is sort of look at curated lists and try to fill in gaps, make sure that as much as possible you don't have obvious blind spots, which you're still going to have because there's so many things out there. And I think that influences or affects how much sensitivity and how much nuance you can bring to your reading of a movie or a book, because you're just not as familiar with everything that went before, which, again, understandable. I do think, I'll say, like, Nightmare Magazine, I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah.
Nightmare Magazine has good coverage of, I'd say, it's not a film criticism zine, but the H Word, which is one of their features, has really good stuff. So there are places, and you might find a particular reviewer on Bloody Disgusting or Sun or one of these more popular venues, and if you click with that person's style, it may make it easier to learn about movies that you would otherwise not be exposed to, because now you've got a voice that you can follow, as opposed to just randomly seeing headlines popping up in your feed.
Yeah, I mean, I've been writing. I call them, they're like trifles, but I've been writing these articles for Lionsgate Limited, and the last one was about Jacob's Ladder, but it was about how Jacob's Ladder in my own life, the movie Jacob's Ladder was a film that I was aware of long before it was ever made. It became this legendary, unmade movie. The American Film Institute called it one of the 10 greatest unmade scripts in Hollywood. That's when I first became aware of it. And then Cinefantastic magazine did a whole spread on Jacob's Ladder. So when I was asked to write the article for Lionsgate Limited, I wrote about my experience. I mean, I wrote it not from my perspective, but I thought that was the interesting story to tell. And I thought it was a story that a lot of people just don't know. And so I wanted to go through and write an article that would sort of, in a way, illuminate something that maybe I only clocked, that no one else would have paid attention to. But for me, it was a personal story, but I didn't start out going, when I was a child, I knew about this movie. And I didn't want to write it that way, but I did want to convey something that maybe people didn't know. And I find that I'm not as much interested in people's opinions of movies that have been around for 40 years as I am interested about when people write from their perspective now and how they feel about things. It irks me when I read film criticism today about older movies, because there is no perspective brought into that. And I knew even when I was a kid that if a movie came out before I'd seen it, that there was a whole, the movie existed for a lot of people. And there was a lot of, it made a splash when it came out. Like when I saw All About Eve at USC in 1988, I was blown away. I didn't know anything about, I mean, I knew it existed, but I thought that it was something that would not appeal to me at all. And when I first saw it for the very first time, I'm like, this movie is amazing. I was blown away. I got to see it in the theater at USC in the Norris Theater, and I saw this film that it had an incredible villain. It had unbelievable amoral people. It was all about the theater. The performances were amazing, and I'd never seen anything quite like it. And I sat there and I thought, it was the best picture of 1950. So it's not like this was not a secret, but I had never, looked into all this. And for me, it was revelatory. And I watched this and I was completely, and when the movie was over, I had this experience where Drew Casper, the famous film teacher at USC, he was sitting in the corner at his lectern down at the, or standing there. There was nobody else in the theater. And I was just sitting there marveling at this unbelievable, one of the greatest screenplays ever written. I love this movie so much. And he was just sitting there looking at me, just nodding, going, as if we'd now shared this bond. Everyone else just got up and walked away. And I'm like, I wanted to talk about it, but nobody was there. And I feel that a lot of today's film criticism is about what people write that they're the judges and juries of these movies. Like, oh, really? This is a classic film? Well, I'm going to tell you whether it really is or not.
Right.
And that's irksome.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a balance in criticism where, for me, one of the things that's valuable in the types of film criticism that I look for is some kind of evaluation of the merits of the film relative to the intent of the film. So you
Sure.
want to have a perspective on what is the thing that the film is trying to accomplish, and then to see if it's doing that or not. It's a separate question whether you like the thing that it is trying to accomplish. It's a completely distinct question, right? I mean, it can overlap, but it doesn't have to. And there could be films. So this is where I run into a situation. We haven't talked about this. I don't know if this ever happens to you, but sometimes there are films that I really like that I don't recommend because I think that the thing that they're doing is not something that the person that I'm talking to wants done.
100%. Yes.
Right. And the other thing that you were saying, which I think is interesting too, is I like film criticism that gets you excited about watching films, especially. Right. It could be a film that you've already seen, but then you want to rewatch it and see it in a different way. Agreed. Because you've had these thoughts sparked in your mind by this clever commentary. Or it just could be a film that you don't know much about, and then you discover it, and it just sort of pushes you over to the edge to want to see it. Recently, we were talking about, I just watched for the first time Gods and Monsters, which I think is appropriate to bring up during spooky season as well, right?
Oh, terrific film, by the way.
Terrific film. Won, I think it was the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. Bill Condon directed, and it essentially talks about the last days in the life of James Whale, who had directed famous films, including Frankenstein,
played by Ian McKellen.
Ian McKellen, brilliant performance. Brendan Fraser, incredible performance as well. And it is based on a literary novel by Christopher Bram. And the novel is not exactly a bio, but it took his experience of reading the biography of James Whale, and it sort of attempted to fictionally fill in some of the gaps of things that were not made clear or not known at that time about why James Whale ended up the way that he did, which we will just say it involves a swimming pool. Because again, coming back to your
no, but I mean that's a wonderful, wonderful film. By the way, I just want to chime in that 1001 Johnny, a longtime viewer of the channel, sends in a tip and says, "So sorry to intrude when you have company, Rob. Ultraman episodes 10 and 14, Mysterious Dinosaur Base, and the Pearl Defense Directive. Return of Ultraman 20, The Monster is a Giant Shooting Star in Space, and Ultraman Omega Episode 2, The Alien, Scholar, and The Alien and Scholar and I." And wants to know, do you know Ultraman?
I have heard Ultraman being recommended on this channel, but I am not familiar personally with Ultraman.
Well, it's an acquired taste, like Japanese science fiction from the 60s is.
Right.
You know, if you like your kaiju movies and stuff, there's a lot of Ultraman and Super 7.
Okay,
and the whole...
so where would I start?
Well, go back to the first Ultraman series. The funny thing about here's the funny thing I have. Godzilla is a perfect example because, you know, we didn't have Ultraman growing up. I didn't have it. It wasn't airing in the U.S.
Right.
So it was something I read about first. The thing about Asian science fiction, when I was a kid, and, you know, you're watching even Godzilla movies, If you watch the first Godzilla, you watch the original Japanese Godzilla, it's like a legitimately great movie. In America, they added Raymond Burr to it, and as the Godzilla series moved along, it has many different tones, much like the James Bond series. And there's a lot of Godzilla you can't take seriously. But when I was a kid, one of my favorite movies, not just kaiju movies, but favorite movies, was Rodan, which I think was the first color kaiju film. And Rodan had this emotional component. It had a great horror component. I loved it. But the thing about Ultraman was a certain tonal, there was a certain tonal thing going on in Ultraman that is a little difficult. Japanese superheroes, as much as I love things like Kamen Rider, and it's hard for Western audiences to take it seriously. It's tough. And it's even tougher now when you go back and you watch that stuff. And the thing about like the modern Godzilla movies, you look at Godzilla -1 and you think there was a movie called Godzilla's Revenge and Godzilla versus the Smog Monster and Godzilla versus the Astro Monster, and then you watch Godzilla -1, it's like in a whole different universe. It's like the difference in the Bond franchise, it's like the difference between watching Diamonds Are Forever and Casino Royale.
Right.
And you have to, they're all part of the same continuum. But if I were to tell somebody to watch James Bond movies and they'd never seen them, and they go back and they either pick Diamonds Are Forever or Man with a Golden Gun, I'm like, oh. But they're still part of the franchise. You can't, you have to deal with all that. The Ultraman franchise is kind of like that. And to be fair, I've not seen all of the Ultraman episodes, but it's hard to go back and for me to watch that stuff now. Just like it would be difficult for me to go back and watch, Godzilla's Revenge now. Loved it when I was a kid. Or Godzilla versus Megalon. Jet Jaguar, Megalon. I mean, awesome when you're 8. But now a little bit more difficult to sort of deal with. And again, especially because what I talk about with Japanese science fiction, there's a whimsy in Japanese culture and in Asian culture that we don't have in the West. We don't get that kind of whimsy. It's hard for us to deal with. So Ultraman, it's tough. It's tough to go back and watch it now.
It sounds like a little bit of it goes ultra way.
Yes, it does. Now 1001 Johnny is going to get pissed. So don't get mad, dude. 1001 Johnny goes on to say, for the Twilight Zone, Rob, I always heard fear at 20,000 feet. It's actually nightmare at 20,000 feet. And to serve man for my generation of pop culture. My parents, however, had made references to Time Enough at Last, especially after I was introduced to Master Meredith as the Penguin. Well, what's really interesting? Let me ask you about this, because, again, I'm older than you. The Twilight Zone beginning in like the late 80s, but 90s and 2000s, they would have Twilight Zone marathons on local channels at Thanksgiving. What is your experience with the Twilight Zone?
So my parents really liked the Twilight Zone. So when we were, I was abroad at the time that you're mentioning. I was born in Spain, and then I lived in Germany for a while as well, briefly in the US for 2 years. But my point with that is that we weren't really getting Twilight Zone in the same rerun format or presentation, but occasionally you could seek it out. And, I think particularly my dad was very fond of some of the classic episodes. So I had watched some episodes of the Twilight Zone. Eventually, when I became a teenager and we had access to cable in Germany, I would record them, and I would go back and try to get as many as I could. When I moved to the States, I wanted to watch all of the Twilight Zone. So that's what I did. And then I couldn't believe how great it looked. I had purchased the complete Twilight Zone on DVD. And when that remastered Blu-ray set came out,
dude, it
was like a new Twilight Zone.
I would say, because they did that before they did the Star Trek The Next Generation remaster. The Twilight Zone was my jam. Other than Star Trek, the Twilight Zone turned me on to more literary, more genre writers than even Star Trek did. And people like, Charles Beaumont, one of the great fantasists of the mid-20th century. And teaching me about horror, but that Twilight Zone box set on Blu-ray,
Unbelievable.
Like you, because we had NTSC television. It was garbage. Blacks were not black. Watching that, I think the first episode I put in of that was Where Is Everybody? One of the very first episodes of Twilight Zone. And even though I
think it might be the first one.
It's like the first episode. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't get enough. I'd seen these episodes dozens of times.
Right.
And it was like watching a brand new show. What's interesting about that was no one, before the Twilight Zone was remastered for high definition, all anybody had ever seen was NTSC, 640 by 480 with our horrible video systems where blacks were not really black. And you realize how brilliant that show was photographed. It was a whole different experience. And now I feel that without, like when I was a kid, every kid had a favorite Twilight Zone episode. It didn't matter who you were. Every kid had a favorite. Nowadays, people are like, eh. And what's weird is the Twilight Zone was 1959 to 1964. And I wasn't born yet. And yet for 30 years, every single kid had a favorite Twilight Zone episode.
Right.
Now, I know people that have never seen an episode.
Yeah, as you say, it's a great vehicle of discovery for writers too. In terms of a lot of the people who penned those screenplays have extensive bibliographies, and they're really good wordsmiths, and they're good storytellers.
Oh, and they have to establish the great thing. Okay, so for those of you watching now who might not have seen Twilight Zone, there are 5 seasons of Twilight Zone. It ran from 1959 to 1964. The 4th season, they went from their half-hour format to their hour format, and everybody agrees that the hour format was not the best for Twilight Zone because you have to pad out a story. But the great thing about the Twilight Zone is, in less than 30 minutes, you have to introduce us to characters, you have to establish a premise, and tell us an entire story that pays off in basically, with commercials, call it 25 minutes. It was a brilliant writing, what would you call it, laboratory? And not every Twilight Zone episode's genius, but there are, I would say, as far as an anthology show goes, it's one of the greatest examples of, it's mid-20th century. It's one of the greatest examples of any media, I think, ever. It to me, if you were to say to me, what is my favorite television show of all time, everybody would say Star Trek, and I'd be like, nope, it's the Twilight Zone. I love Star Trek in a different way.
Is for me, the Twilight Zone is the best science fiction show ever made.
Bar none. There's nothing. Now, when you say that, the fashion of the ages, people like different things because cinema has changed. But in terms of the Twilight Zone, what it does and the depths of human emotion and human experience, and it's also probably the most literary science fiction TV show ever made as well. And such the writing of it and the things it was doing at the time, it's astonishing. But man, those remastered discs, dude.
And as you were talking about it, one of the things about the Twilight Zone is the economy and the storytelling, right? And the voiceover. So usually that little bit of narration that you get from Rod Sterling at the beginning, it's so smart in that it's not just setting up the theme, but it's typically doing the heavy lifting of like your first entire act. So you can essentially start the story in Act 2 because he's told you what the first act is. So you've shaved off, 10, 15, 20 minutes of visual storytelling, and now you're completely absorbed by the drama of what's unfolding. It also has the morality aspect going on. A lot of the episodes they're not moralizing per se, but they posit serious moral questions. And you get the range of tones. You get some that are more, whimsical. You get some that are truly horrific. You get some that are purely cerebral and science fictional. So that's one of the things about the beauty of anthology shows. And I think that the Twilight Zone, did it best.
Well, the article that I read that I read tonight, for people that watch this show, I hope they made the connection that I've said often, that you need to learn how to watch movies. It's a skill, just like reading is a skill. You might know how to read. That doesn't mean you're literate. And anybody can watch a movie, but that doesn't mean you're cinematically literate, because cinema is a language unto itself. It's funny. I interviewed the clip that I have of our actress, Chella Farrow, that's in White Devils. I'd never met her before. And I interviewed her. She's going to be at the screening if you want to meet her. First of all, she's one of the most strikingly beautiful people I've ever met in my life. But we started talking about, I asked her, what movies were you a fan of growing up? And she's from South Africa. But the first thing that came to her mind was Kieslowski. She goes, I started watching movies in the 90s. And the first thing she said was Kieslowski's Three Colors trilogy. And I'm thinking to myself, I spend my life immersed on YouTube. There's nobody that would give that answer. In my entire, this is not a slight on anyone, but if somebody said I started watching, if I asked anybody who watches this channel or John's channel, tell me some movies you watched in the 90s, they would not bring up the Three Colors trilogy. But she did. And then she goes, and then there's another movie I have to tell you about. And I said, we almost said at the same time, I said, The Double Life of Veronique. And she was like, yes. And when Martin Scorsese talks about the difference, like when he gets upset about superhero movies and cinema, and then everyone gets all bent out of shape, well, they're cinema too. No, this conversation is exactly what superhero movies are great. I love them. But they're not cinema. The delivery system is the same. But I would say that when you think about cinema, it's not Avengers Endgame that I first think of. And I love Avengers Endgame and I love Infinity War. But when Martin Scorsese is talking about these things, he's talking about the fact that he misses that there's no more Three Colors trilogy and there's no more Double Life of Veronique. And I was reminded of that today when I was interviewing our lead actress, and it just made me fall in love with her even more, because I've only ever looked at her on this screen editing things. So, yeah.
One of this you've just reminded me of something else that popped into my head when you were reading the article at the beginning. Back, I think it was in 1989, Isaac Asimov was addressing, I think it was the American Booksellers Association. And he was giving a speech. He was known as somebody who did a lot of speculation and extrapolation about the future. And he was giving a speech about the possibilities of technological development of this tool, this device that would really, it would allow things. It was like a television. You're going to be able to miniaturize your television experience because it was going to be small and it was going to be portable. But it didn't need any charger. It basically had zero energy consumption. The only thing that you needed as a power source was, your will. And it had the features of immediate start and stop. The data stream, you could just, manipulate it at will, go forward, go backward, pause it whenever you wanted to. And so he built this up with all of these pieces of description. And then he said, oh, well, wait a minute. We actually already have that. It's called the book.
Indeed.
So with that, let me briefly show you the last book, Rob.
Here it comes.
Appropriate. This is even larger than everything else that I've shown. Just got this.
Oh, I don't have that yet. And that's the Bob Peak art on the cover, not the lame American art
Right.
that we got.
So I have not had a chance to dip into this. I just got this myself, but I'm really excited that we have we have these in-depth, just absolutely beautiful, stunning books that now cover the motion picture, The Wrath of Khan, The Search for Spock, and I think that they've done First Contact as well.
Yeah, I mean, my only problem is you're still looking back at it from the perspective of now. I mean, Search for Spock is 41 years old. And it's fine. I think it's great that they're doing that. And as somebody who's documented Star Trek, going back in and looking into it's to me, it's always a little iffy. And only because living through it, having been there or been a fan and reading everything that came out or reading everything at the time. But it's good to have these books now. And it's also interesting to see, to me, I've done an Inglorious Trexperts episode. We were not fans of Star Trek 3.
Right.
I've never been a big fan of that film for various reasons. But there is a lot in it that I love. But it's wild to watch people write about these things from today's perspective. I do find that very interesting because I could be a snob for my whole life, but movies endure. And to see what people write about them today is always very interesting, even though as I think we get further and further and further away from what they meant and what was going on. And at the time, I mean, maybe that's what art's supposed to be. Maybe if we were around when the Mona Lisa was painted, it was something you had to toss off because he needed a few bucks for a meal, and he didn't think anything of it. He just painted it and said, whatever, and took off because we're not there. But now, hundreds of years later, my God, it's one of the greatest paintings of all time. So we don't know, but that's always the interesting thing when you're going back. And the thing is, it's not really fair because when I saw All About Eve, I watched All About Eve in 1988. Which was, what was that, 38 years removed from when the movie originally came out. So my being blown away from it, I could sit there and tell my friends, oh my God, let me tell you why this movie is so terrific. I'm sure someone who saw it in 1950 would think I was insufferable. So, right. It's always that continuum where you exist in of both history and reality. And so the fact is, I think what's most important is that people are still writing about this stuff. That years, decades later, that
right.
1001 Johnny is trying to get me to get everybody to watch Ultraman, even though, maybe a lot of people, it's not their thing. But for him, it is. Nobody knows more about Ultraman than 1001 Johnny.
Yeah, like you said, I think it's great. We're getting these books, reference volumes that are bringing and some of them, like I was looking at the one on First Contact because I was obviously more contemporary, and again something that maybe for me was more akin to the experience that you had with Wrath of Khan or Search for Spock, etc. And I thought that it was a good journalistic tone, and it had things that I didn't know about the production of the film, and I've read a lot about it. Lou Anders, I believe, wrote a book about the making of First Contact back in the day. But this had things that were not in that book, and so on and so forth. And I think you make a good point about with art. I think it's not just the external history that changes one's perspective, but it's also your personal history, because your experience of that thing is the collision of the thing with yourself. Right. And that, depending on what else you've experienced in the interim, you're going to now have yet a different experience. So you can keep coming back. It's one of the things about great pieces of art or great pieces of pop culture or horror. You can keep coming back to them, and they change, you change, everything changes. And
oh, yeah, absolutely. Speaking of changing, Darth Plato says, have I seen The Diplomat Season 3, Rob? It's a big step down. I have. I watched The Diplomat Season 3 when it dropped and a couple days ago. And I would say I think you're right. I thought it was a step down because it goes back and deals with... Like, here's the... Okay. The Diplomat was created and is written by a woman, Deborah Cohen, I believe. And she was a writer on The West Wing. Here's the difference between men and women, I think, when it comes to writing fiction, especially genre fiction. Women are more concerned with the people and the emotions in the story, where men are concerned more with the plot. And I'm not saying that men can't do both and women can't do both, but you're coming at it from a different perspective. And The Diplomat season 3 really went back into the emotions of this marriage and our two characters. And it spent a lot of time. One of them, who's been sort of sidelined for the first 2 seasons, now takes the lead. The male Kerry Russell's husband she gets stepped over and he becomes president of the United States. That story, the emotion of that might not have been our particular thing. However, I would say that they delivered in the last 3 episodes of the season. It's only an 8-episode season. And I thought the final scene was a banger. So I enjoyed The Diplomat season 3 in a different way. I really liked season 1 because it was a great balance of both. Season 2 leaned more into the plot. Season 3 came more back into the emotion of it all. But then they brought it back into the plot at the end. And I thought it was I liked it. I did not like it as much as season 1 or 2. Make of that what you will. 1001. Actually, Alvaro 1001 Johnny says you can start with the most recent Ultraman shows, as the last 3 have been dubbed in English and Blu-ray releases. I recommend Ultraman Blazar. But you would never do that. You would go back to the beginning.
Well, I mean, it depends on the size of something in terms of like how vast. I have no idea how many hundreds or thousands of episodes or movies there are. So it really depends. But I will. I mean, you've got the resident expert. Why would I not follow that person's advice, right?
Well, that's true. It's true. That's good. I would not go against him. DUI Champ says, "Hey R&B, last Sunday for the first time, I watched 2009's Daybreakers. I didn't expect much, but holy shit, what a well thought out movie. Shocked at how good it was. Do you have thoughts on the film?" Well, I was going to say, I own 2 different versions of it on 4K. I have the Australian version. I love Daybreakers. I love it. And I think that, to me, the Spielberg brothers do a great job of following up what John Carpenter was doing. It's a great genre pastiche. In a way, Daybreakers is kind of Escape from New York meets a vampire movie. Vampires. And it's a great genre pastiche. I loved it. I love the world building. And if you love Daybreakers, you have to watch the Spielberg brothers follow-up. Predestination. Which is an adaptation of Robert Heinlein's short story, All You Zombies, which is only 3 pages long or something. Don't read that. I watched Predestination. Did you see it?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
I loved it. As a matter of fact, if you want to watch Predestination, watch it as a double bill with Looper. But I loved Predestination. And those two brothers, what have they done lately? I go back, I look at them, and I love, those are 2, look, I'll say that they're both B movies. Daybreakers but it's a great B movie.
Right.
It's when I say that, it's not $100 million movie, but it's those are the kind of movies I grew up watching and loving. I think Daybreakers is incredible. I love it. But when I say it's incredible, it's not Avengers Endgame and Infinity War. It exists in its own lane, and I think it's really well done. I really enjoy it. And both Lionsgate Limited, their Steelbook version came out 2 weeks ago, and Umbrella, because they are Australian, put out a beautiful box set in 4K. Really like the movie a lot.
I'm a big fan too, and I will just say, for anybody who's curious and again maybe interested in checking out my Substack, Gulf of Selves.
By the way, if you want to know where to find that, there it is.
Thank you.
Right there. There's your Substack. And
I was just going to mention, I wrote a piece called "We Suck Young Blood," which is about vampire movies. and I actually gave my top 10 vampire movies, and Daybreakers was on the list. If you want to find out what the other ones are.
Okay. You can't. I know I want to direct people to your Substack, but you can't in a Halloween-themed episode. Next week is Halloween. We're 8 days away from Halloween. You can't sit there and go, "Oh, I wrote my list of 10 great vampire movies," and then think I'm going to let you go. Come on, bruh. What is your 10 favorite vampires movie? What are they?
You want me to go through all of them right now, Rob?
Yes, dude. Yes, you said you can just list them if you want. You don't
Sure.
even, but you said
Okay.
your 10 favorite. Now look, I would encourage everyone to go to your Substack
Yeah.
and read the article. What's the article called?
It's called We Suck Young Blood.
Which I had to hear you say that because what a great title. I had to hear you say it again.
It's a
We
reference
Suck.
to Radiohead.
Well, come on.
Radiohead too.
Give us a list.
Okay.
Not even in order. Just give us your 10.
Well, and they're not in order because I didn't want to rank them. But so Daybreakers, I mentioned, is one of them. 30 Days of Night is on my list. Love that film.
Well, hang on a second. Give us a little commentary.
I mean, there's something about the ambiance of 30 Days of Night. I think it was David Slade directed that film, and there's just something really lean and mean about it. And it's sort of like a hybrid of The Thing with with vampires, if you will, in terms of how it unfolds and how efficient it is. And it spawned a series of, well, there's a lot of related material, I'll say it like that. They were working off graphic novels, but there's also books that they did after the film. So anyway, 30 Days of Night would be on there. Daybreakers, we've already talked about. Let the Right One In was on my list, if I remember. And I think that I included that because it has elements of romance and melancholy. We were talking earlier when, in terms of the Why I Love Horror book, about feeling like an outsider, and Let the Right One In is very minimalist, but it gets to the heart of coming of age stories in an interesting way. I like that it's muted, but it's emotionally very alive. What else did I have on my list? Let's see if I can remember all of them. A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. What do you think of that movie, Rob? Have you seen it?
Oh, I own it. I do like that, especially because it's Iranian, isn't it?
It is. Iranian New Wave.
And one of the things I really love I love seeing other countries, especially I really wish that the theocracy in Iran would fall, because I really want to see the Iranian film industry explode. Because there's so many Iranian filmmakers I like, and I think, one of the things that would benefit the world is Iranian horror films. Because, you watch movies like Holy Spider, or you watch movies like, I think that there's a lot of greatness there. But I think it's a really interesting film. I mean, I really enjoy it. I love the way it's shot too.
Right.
But these are pretty modern, dude.
Well, I'm not done. So going a little bit farther back, you got, let's see, Abel Ferrara's The Addiction. That was on my list. I thought
Interesting filmmaker. He's done.
Yes. I'm a huge fan of Lily Taylor. I think her performance in The Addiction is phenomenal. And again, a little bit of the my preference for sort of the black and white art house aesthetic for some of these. I like the textures of New York in The Addiction. And, we recently watched After the Hunt. There's a little bit of academia that's going on too.
Yep.
So I enjoyed it very much. Okay, going back, Nosferatu from 1922. I mean, had to put Murnau's movie on there. I think it's a masterpiece of German expressionism. I also included Egger's Nosferatu from 2024.
Wow. Okay.
I thought it was meticulously composed, and I really, really liked it. I think in between was trying to remember. I don't remember the exact year, but somewhere in the 90s was Shadow of the Vampire.
Right, with Willem Dafoe.
With Willem Dafoe. Again, he's already on the list with Daybreakers, right? He keeps coming up on this list, but That film was my gateway to Murnau. I had not seen anything by Murnau when I discovered Shadow of the Vampire, and so it was a very influential film for me as a film fan. And I liked Malkovich. I liked the score by Dan Jones. I like this idea of recreating things too.
Sure.
Only Lovers Left Alive.
Oh, it's such a great film.
Had to put it on there. Jim Jarmusch, right? He directed that film.
Shot in Detroit.
Yeah, again, it's got that urban grittiness, but it's very. I think that's one film where you can justifiably use the word ennui.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's super stylish. What an amazing soundtrack. Great performances too. And let's see, what am I missing? How many? I haven't been keeping track, so I think I've mentioned 8 or 9 by now.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but they're all. I'm a little disappointed. There's not a lot of classical stuff going on there. You're looking at last 20 years so far.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. These are. I think that's my sweet spot for a lot of horror movies, quite honestly. So that reflects that.
And I understand. I mean, there's a literary bent to what you
100%.
love.
Oh, that reminded me of the last one. By far the most pretentious choice. So if people didn't hate my list already, Nadja. Have you seen Michael Almereyda's Nadja?
Yeah, of course.
How would you even describe that film?
You just became one of the drama clubbers at my high school. You know, the pretentious drama club folks that thought they were better than the rest of us. I mean, look, you know, it's. I think it's off. Same with Let the Right One In a way. I like the non-classical approach to vampirism. I guess you could call it that.
Right.
Which is always interesting because I mean, the classical approach to vampirism it's changed over the years, and there's a very Nadja is one of those. I think one of the movies, along with The Addiction, where the modern sensibility or the only Lovers Left Alive. There's something going on here where vampirism has been brought down from the fantasy more into the real.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting. And
I think that talks to me for sure. I mean, there's Lost Boys, Interview with a Vampire. I mean, there's all of these movies that you see that will probably be on many people's lists, right, of the top vampire movies of all time.
But those also are very. There's the pulp sensibility. There's the Hollywood. Look, I love Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark.
Right.
I love that film, but I understand it's one of my favorite vampire movies. But it's also because it's an action movie, and it's got a lot of it's not a meditation on mortality or immortality. Right. It's a whole different thing. So I can understand. I mean, it really depends what you want. And that's why the vampire genre has endured, because it can be so many things to so many people.
And again, I was looking for things that maybe were not as obvious as well. I mean, honestly, when you're putting together a list, I mean, what are the top 10 of anything, right? It'll change based on your mood and the audience that you're thinking about, et cetera. At least it does in my case. So, I mean, Nadja is, I think it's kind of like a music video. It's purely a mood movie. It's just a very avant-garde, very pretentious, a super fun film if you're wanting that.
Yeah. I mean, look at the Twilight movies. Yeah. You know, here was the Twilight films started as what, 50 Shades of Grey fan fiction, you know, and then it altered into something else. And or the 50 Shades of Grey was Twilight fan fiction. And the thing about the Twilight movies that I've always thought was interesting, and I read the first book of the 4. And, you know, I read it because, okay, it's YA, but I love vampires and I love horror novels. What I thought was really interesting about the Twilight movie is it's the perfect fantasy for a teenage girl. It's about a boy, a beautiful boy, a pretty boy, an anime-style boy, you know, who loves you but doesn't want to fuck you. And for a teenage girl, that's like the ultimate fantasy. You have the ultimate protector. You have the ultimate cool boy. You have the ultimate pretty boy. You've got the teen idol, the fantasy idol, the tortured soul that you can take care of, who isn't going to violate your sanctity. And that's why I thought that the Twilight book the first book was interesting. And a lot of people make fun of it now as sparkly vampires, but really it's wish fulfillment for any girl that put Beatles posters up or Sean Cassidy posters up on their walls. It's like you love them until they touch you. And now you've got a hero that never will. Until, of course, in the later books, because everybody wants it to happen eventually.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I've always loved vampire mythology, no matter what it is.
And I think, I've been just recently, I'm starting to think that there's something about the extended treatment in the form of a TV series that almost plays better with vampires, or it can at least. It has the potential to really give that scope that helps to support the idea of being immortal. I've been blown away, Rob, by the Interview with the Vampire TV series.
Oh,
I don't know a lot of people that are talking about it.
Oh, it's look, the changes they've made have annoyed me, but I have to tell you, the trailers for Vampire Lestat, I am so in. I am so
Absolutely.
in. I mean, one of the great travesties of life is that Tom Cruise did not go on to make Vampire Lestat, which I don't. Right. That's her best book in at least for me.
Right.
I'm like, how do you not want to do the Vampire Lestat? Like it was. I actually I went to a book signing and met Anne Rice, and she signed my. I had a first edition of Interview with a Vampire with the foil cover, the gold foil cover, and I had her. It was when Queen of the Damned came out, so I took my first editions of Vampire Lestat and Interview, and then bought Queen of the Damned at the Vroman's bookstore in Pasadena, and had her sign them and talk to her, and she was delightful. And I don't have those books anymore. Part of my storage debacle, my storage locker debacle. But somebody has them. Somebody has my books signed to me. So if you find them, I'd love to. You find them in the wild, to Bob or to Rob, whatever she said, because I always had my signatures signed. Send them to me. I'd love to have them back.
I'm going to plug one more show before we wrap.
Yeah,
I think that this is a vampire recommendation, even for people who don't like horror necessarily, or at least most of it. Mike Flanagan's Midnight Mass.
Fan-fucking-tastic.
Unbelievable. The writing, the character development, the pacing. Again, the control of tone, to take us back to what we were talking about a couple of hours ago. He, for once, he's not adapting Stephen King or someone else's work.
Right.
But it's heavily infused with all those influences. And the way that he talks about addiction, but also faith, and people's emotional needs, and I think it's a very interesting take on trauma as well, and self-trauma. Can't recommend it enough. Midnight Mass.
Terrific. We still have some super chats. The people, I love when people are verbose. A lot of good stuff. 1001 Johnny says, if I've found any reason to be offended by the truth that 60s and 70s Ultraman is an acquired taste today, rest assured, I'll let you know this Saturday. Unless, of course, this week's membership call gets delayed. I don't think it will. And I'm sure we will now know why. Well, and he goes on to say, well, I want you to watch Ultraman, Rob. Everyone is welcome, though. Well, look, by the way, 1001 Johnny is a very learned man. And he is a total Ultraman scholar. I mean, he knows his stuff. So it's always a pleasure to hear. Look, for no other reason, I love to hear somebody passionate about Japanese science fiction. So we probably should end this show. I mean, like you said, we've now been going. I started at 9. It's now 11:50. It's a 2 hour.
We have to end before we reach Midnight Metal territory.
Yeah, that's right. We do. So where can people find you? Obviously, your Substack, your book, Equimedian is available now at Amazon. You can get it on Kindle, or you can get the softcover. Can you still get the hardcover?
Yes, sir. They're both available. Ebook as well.
I would recommend. Explain. I mean, Equimedian is a very interesting. Look, I knew I'd met you briefly. I didn't really know you. And then I read the first. I've talked about the first 2 paragraphs of your book, but your book is your book seems like it was the kind of book reading it I wanted to be in front of the computer, have Google on, and there's a lot to take in. How would you describe that book for people who might not even be science fiction fans, but I think everybody could get something out of it? What would you say to people about your book, Equimedian?
Well, listen, I'd say if, it's a story. The approach to the story in Equimedian is sort of a hybrid between science fiction and mainstream. So it's got a little bit of lit fic going on, and there's a lot of nods and elements that are reminiscent of Philip K. Dick. So if you like something that's trippy and weird and that questions what reality is, you're going to get that. But I think one of the things that you're alluding to is the fact that there's a lot of references because the character is a science fiction fan. And so he's constantly thinking about things and processing his experiences in terms of science fiction that a lot of readers won't know because this is set in the 70s in an alternate timeline. But all of the books and references in it exist because somewhere out there, if there are infinite realities, there's a reality where events are different, but the texts are the same. That's just inevitable through, endless permutations. And so, could you sit down in front of the computer? And I think you should, Rob. I think you should read it again, and we should have a read along. We'll just do one chapter of Equimedian.
I wonder if I would do that. By the way, but I think the greatest strength of that book is the writing. The way you wield words in that book is a joy. Like, there were times when I would go back and just read pages again just because of the way you crafted a paragraph. And I think that there is such a thing as there is a joy of reading, when you're reading language that really. And there have been other people who I love the way people I love the way Don Winslow writes, or when I read Dan Simmons' Carrying Comfort, he would state what happened in the chapter. Like, he'd open a chapter with some shit that went down, some huge shit. You're like, oh my God. And then you'd have to read the rest of the chapter to find out what he was talking about. And there were just ways, and you did something different than that, but it was delicious. Delicious. Reading your book was delicious.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do.
People should go get it.
Yeah, I certainly tried to craft something that was interesting on the level of sentences, not just on the level of ideas and stories. So
right. And you're working on a horror novel, which, by the way, I can honestly say one of my most eagerly awaited literary experiences is your horror novel. I don't even know anything. I don't want to know anything. I don't want to be a beta reader. I want to buy the fucking, I could, if you can get a galley, I want to go buy the book. I want to get it from Amazon in hardcover when it comes out. Like I got your Equimedian.
I'm excited.
I can't wait.
Thank you for the plug. But got a couple of books of interviews out there as well. So if you're interested in the history of science fiction, that's something that I've covered in several other nonfiction books also.
Well, this has been great. I think that the books that we covered in this, let me just go through them. We have Your Favorite Scary Movie, that's about the Scream franchise by Ashley Cullins. We have Horror's New Wave, which is a big book on the first 15 years of Blumhouse. We have Volume 1 of 2 of The Screen Chills Companion, 1931 to 1939 by Chris Fellner, and they go up. There's another one after 1939. There's this book that I can't wait to read, Why I Love Horror, on essays of horror literature. And finally, which Alvaro hasn't read yet, Scream With Me, Horror Films and the Rise of American Feminism by Eleanor Johnson. And look, I think you and I both are purveyors of literature and books, and everybody should read. The world would be a much better place right now if people read more. I mean, you don't need pharmacological assistance. Just pick up a book, man. Books are delicious and they're good for you.
Books are portals to incredible experiences.
Yeah,
they're passports. to other realities.
Totally. And I want to thank you for being here. I love doing shows with you. It's so much fun. I've come to greatly admire you and respect you over the couple of years. I mean, we met at a theatrical screening of For All Mankind. I mean, what's not to love about you? I mean, come on. That's where I met you. You know, over drinks. We were drinking alcohol, talking about For All Mankind after it was over, after experiencing the end of a season in a theater.
And hopefully we will again. But yeah, likewise, appreciate you having me on. Always a blast to be on here and to discuss all this and to go on these weird little side trails. And again, what was it?
I'm all about the weird little side trails.
Thundered one German clergyman. I mean,
there you go. You know, at least, you know, we can celebrate the excitement, celebrate the syndicate, as Kirk might say, but it's all good. And Halloween is coming. And by the way, before I leave, since it didn't work the first time, I got to play this because are you going to come to the premiere? No pressure.
I will be there.
Okay, I'm just saying, anyone who's watching the show, if you live in Southern California, come and meet us.
Eventbrite has the tickets.
From Pretoria. Is everything all right? People talk or say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front door.
Who says you weren't?
Them.
Who?
Them.
It was terrible out there. I could hear breathing.
We told you.
Are you worried about the man?
They hate us. That's the truth. They want to kill and torture every one of us. You can see it in their eyes.
Come now, Frederick. Do you dream about unholy things?
I really don't like what's going on here. There's something wrong, and that's a fact.
Wait. What did you dream last night? This manifestation of evil. You must be delivered from evil.
Hi, I'm Shella Farrow. Come and see White Devils at the Gardena Cinema.
Now, Chella is going to be at the screening. Just so you know. Flying in from Europe. She'll be there. And she's a very impressive woman, if I do say so myself. And one other thing people don't know. Starting Halloween at midnight, for 3 days, it'll be video on demand. You'll be able to buy a stream, and you will be able to watch White Devils worldwide all day Friday, starting midnight Pacific time. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you will be able to watch White Devils online. There'll be a video on demand link. It's hosted by Vimeo, and you will be able to see it for 3 days only. And hopefully we'll make enough money that maybe we can get it into distribution or get it onto a cable network or something. But this is a little movie that could. It is truly the definition of independent cinema. So hopefully people will like it. It's not what people are expecting. It's a very interesting movie. The only person who's seen it outside, I sent it to reviewers. Paul Chatto had some really interesting things to say about it. He's the first person that got back to me after I sent it out to people to watch. But look, support independent filmmaking. Support our how many YouTube channels have movies coming out? You know, come on. Support our.
Well, you say that on the week of Shelby Oaks. You know that, right?
Well, there's one.
Saying.
It's true. You're right. But you know that's kind of what I was alluding to. But are you seeing it tomorrow?
You know what? No, I think I'm going to be watching the new documentary Orwell 2 + 2 = 5. That seems interesting. So
I actually have to go pick up the version of the movie that we're screening theatrically in Burbank and drive it out to the Gardena Cinema and meet Judy Kim and make sure that we can. Everything works well on Tuesday night. So that to me is a 180-mile round trip. So there you go. All right, everyone. I want to thank everybody for generously supporting this channel via Super Chats and tips. And by the way, Midnight Mass is the apex from the great Mike Flanagan, says Mr. Z. By the way, I never answered his question. I don't think I said that, that we did not set up any kind of a GoFundMe or anything about, in the wake of my sister. But I really appreciate you asking. So that was it. We're caught up. But I also want to thank everybody, obviously, my moderating staff. I want to thank Darth Plato for being our genuine and honest historian, and everyone else. I want to thank Alvaro for being here. Go buy his book, Equimedian, on Amazon right now. Get it in whatever format. But I have to say that the hardcover is pretty dope. It's a smaller hardcover. It's got this great, like, that matte finish. It really feels good in your hand. And it's got scratchy paper. It's fun to turn the pages. It's a great book experience. In addition to being a great literary experience, it's a great tactile experience. So go get that book and report back. And I'll be on the John Campea show tomorrow. I'll be back here doing a Robservations tomorrow night. And the Roy Lee interview is going to drop this weekend right before the new Dairy TV series that he's a producer on drops on HBO. So, anything you want to plug?
No, I think you've done a phenomenal job of plugging everything. So thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And remember, our short story competition is going to launch, and pick up a book, any book. As a matter of fact, I'm going to start judging everybody. I want people to send me in the books they've read every week. I'm going to start being judgmental. I'm going to force people to read. Why not? It's fundamental after all. See you later. Okay, we're off the air.